Forget Darth Vader. Forget Palpatine. Forget Maul. They are merely the final chapter, the dying embers of a fire that raged across the galaxy for 25,000 years. The Sith you know are nothing compared to the original 12 Sith Lords. But tonight, we'll uncover the truth. Welcome to Korriban. Not the majestic graveyard of Dark Lords. No, we're going further back. To a time when this remote rock deep in the outer rim was less a galactic threat and more of a galactic embarrassment. This delightful piece of real estate was the homeworld of the original Sith, a species of red-skinned humanoids who were, for the most part, Force-sensitive. The Sith were instinctively violent, perpetually aggressive, and had a natural affinity for the dark side that was less a philosophical choice and more a biological imperative. Peace was a foreign concept, despite this innate bloodlust, or perhaps because of it. They stumbled their way into becoming an advanced species. Their tribes coalesced into kingdoms, each with its own complex social structure built on one simple principle: who could kill whom most efficiently. They waged constant, brutal wars, not with elegant weapons for a more civilized age, but with crude blades and axes enhanced with a primitive form of Force alchemy. This wasn't about sophisticated enchantment. It was about making your sharp rock just a little bit sharper and maybe glow a bit in the dark, mostly for intimidation. The sheer brutality of Sith life was perfectly reflected in the societies they built. All their kingdoms were shackled to a rigid caste system, a social ladder where the bottom rung was perpetually submerged in filth and despair. This system was so entrenched, so unyieldingly permanent, that over millennia, the castes actually began to diverge into distinct subspecies, a process greased along by their alchemical dabbling. It was eugenics with a magical flair, a testament to their dedication to finding new and creative ways to look down on each other. At the very top, you had the Kisai, the priest caste. These were the ones especially strong in the Force, the intellectuals and leaders who devoted their lives to studying the dark side and figuring out new ways to justify their own superiority. They were the architects of the misery. Below them were the Zhugaruk, the engineer caste. They were intelligent, but not quite as plugged into the cosmic evil network as the Kisai. They enjoyed a relatively privileged life, which meant they got slightly cleaner mud huts and were only sacrificed on alternate Tuesdays. They were the ones who had to translate the Kisai's vague, murderous pronouncements into actual, functional war machines. Further down the ladder were the Masasi, the warrior caste, a delightful mix of natural selection and alchemical meddling had sculpted them into living weapons. They were less intelligent but incredibly strong, hulking towers of claw and muscle whose primary social function was to hit things very, very hard until they stopped moving. Thinking was not in their job description, and at the very bottom, crushed under the weight of it all, were the Grotu, the slaves. Their lives were an exercise in extraordinary cruelty, a constant reminder to everyone else that things could always be worse. They were the fuel for the Sith war machine, a disposable resource in a society that had perfected the art of disposability. This entire, horrifying system was the bedrock of their culture. This endless, grinding cycle of war wasn't seen as a problem to be solved. It was the natural state of existence, a form of brutal harmony they valued more than anything else. For thousands of years, this was the story of the Sith petty kingdoms, ruled by arrogant priests and powered by slave labor, locked in a perpetual, pointless struggle for dominance over a miserable rock on the edge of nowhere. This foundation of cruelty and division is crucial. It's the source code for everything the Sith would become. The obsession with a pecking order, the belief that power is the only virtue, the casual acceptance of atrocity, it was all forged here, in the blood-soaked dirt of ancient Korriban. This wasn't an ideology they adopted. It was the air they breathed, the poison in their veins from the moment they were born. This grim, unchanging reality persisted for millennia, a perfect symphony of self-destruction. But the universe, in its infinite and often cruel sense of humor, was about to introduce a new conductor. A Sith was coming who would take this chaotic orchestra of violence and, for the first time, make them all play the same terrifying tune. For thousands of years, the natural state of Korriban was a monotonous, grinding cycle of pointless violence. It was a planetary death metal concert on a loop, a symphony of shattered bone and petty grievance. Then, around 28,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, a different sound cut through the noise. It was the sound of ambition. It was the sound of an idea. It was the sound of one Sith deciding that the endless, chaotic killing was inefficient, and that it was time to introduce some top-down management to the whole bloody affair. This particular agent of change was a Sith named Adders. From the moment he was born, the Kisai priests, those ever astute readers of cosmic tea leaves, knew he was special. He was born with obsidian black skin, a rare mutation among the red-hued Sith. The priests, never ones to let a good anomaly go to waste, immediately declared this a sign of divinity. It's amazing how quickly different becomes divine when it's politically convenient. Adders wasn't just a child, he was a pre-packaged messiah, a marketing campaign waiting to happen. He did not disappoint his handlers. Adders grew into a great warrior, tall and burly, with a tremendous strength in the Force that went far beyond the crude dabbling of his peers. He wasn't just a brawler, he was a prodigy of Sith magic. The catch-all term the Kisai used for their dark side techniques. Using Sith alchemy, he forged himself a set of heavy black armor and a fearsome great battle axe. This wasn't just gear, it was a brand. The armor was a mobile fortress of terror, and the axe became his personal symbol, a brutally effective logo for his new enterprise of conquest. With his followers in Tau, Adders launched a series of wars against the disparate kingdoms of Korriban. This was not the usual chaotic scrum for territory. This was a systematic, merciless series of hostile takeovers. One by one, the petty kings and their squabbling tribes fell before the warrior in black armor. He conquered all of the nations of the Sith, uniting Korriban under a single, iron-fisted state for the very first time in its miserable history. The Kisai, seeing which way the political winds were blowing, promptly gave him a promotion. They proclaimed him the Sithari, the overlord of all Sith. It was a title heavy with power and prophecy, a name that would echo through the ages, whispered by every ambitious apprentice with dreams of galactic domination. King Adders, The Sith ruled as a god among mortals. He was revered and respected, which is a polite way of saying he was feared so completely that no one dared to even think about disrespecting him. His rule lasted for 300 years, a period the Sith would later call the Reign of the Axe. For 3 centuries, the cycle of war that had defined their species finally came to an end. Addus didn't eliminate the violence, of course. He just monopolized it. He replaced the chaos of 1,000 petty tyrants with the organized, efficient oppression of a single, unchallengeable one. For the Sith, this was progress. This was stability. It was a golden age forged in blood and held together by fear. The legacy of Addus is not just in the unification of a planet. It is in the creation of a concept. He was the prototype for every Dark Lord that would follow. He established the ideal of the Sith, a single, perfect being, free of restriction, who would rule the Sith, destroy them, and remake them into something greater. His reign became the foundational myth of the Sith, a half-remembered bedtime story of a time when one being was strong enough to bend an entire species to his will. He proved it could be done. He created the blueprint for empire. For 300 years, Addus's grim peace held. The Sith, isolated on their throne world, were finally united under their God King. They had finally stopped tearing themselves to pieces, content for the moment to worship the man who had beaten them all into submission. They were stagnant, self-obsessed, and utterly convinced they were the center of the universe. And then, one day, the universe decided to knock on their door. For 3 centuries, the Sith stewed in their own juices on Korriban, ruled by a god king and utterly convinced of their own superiority. They had achieved a perfect, brutal harmony. But the galaxy is a big place, and it has a nasty habit of knocking on the doors of self-important recluses. In the year 27,700 BBY, that knock came. It wasn't a polite rap. It was the silent, arrogant arrival of a technologically superior starship, a predator gliding into the skies of a world that had never had a visitor. These galactic tourists were the Rakata. At the time, they were the undisputed bullies of the galactic schoolyard. Their infinite empire was the dominant power on the cosmic stage, and like the Sith, they were naturally inclined toward the dark side of the Force. The key difference was that the Rakata had used their malevolence to power technology that far outstripped anything the Sith could even dream of. Their ships traveled the stars using Force-attuned hyperdrives, which acted like divining rods for planets with strong Force signatures. And Korriban, with its population of perpetually furious red aliens, was screaming into the Force like a heavy metal concert in a library. When the Rakata discovered this primitive world teeming with dark side potential, they devised a plan for conquest. But they didn't just land with guns blazing. That would be too straightforward. Instead, they attempted to lull the Sith into a false sense of security, a classic tactic of abusers and colonial powers throughout history. They approached King Addus as well-meaning allies, bearing gifts and questionable wisdom. They gave the Sith holocron technology, the galactic equivalent of giving a calculator to a culture that still counts on its fingers. Then, in an act of supreme arrogance, they began to teach the Sith about the Force. Specifically, They introduced the concept of the dark side as a distinct entity. Before this, the Sith just saw their endless cycle of violence as a kind of natural harmony, a beautiful balance that must not be disturbed. The Rakata preached against all notions of harmony and balance, pushing the Sith to embrace the fullest, most unhinged form of the dark side. They were, in essence, trying to teach a shark to be more aggressive in the water. King Adus and his followers ate it up. New ideas, new technology. It was all very exciting. But Adus, for all his brutality, was no one's fool. Before long, he sniffed out the Rakata's true intentions. They weren't here to enlighten the Sith. They were here to enslave them. He refused to allow this. As the Rakata finally began their invasion, Adus rallied the unified kingdom of the Sith against them, kicking off a long and bloody war that consumed the entire planet. It should have been a slaughter. The Rakata had advanced weaponry, starships, and millennia of experience in galactic conquest. The Sith had angry thoughts and magically sharpened axes. And yet, against all conceivable odds, the Sith won. They became the first species to ever defeat the mighty Rakata in open war. This single, humiliating defeat was the beginning of the end for the Infinite Empire, which would ultimately collapse 2,000 years later, a cosmic domino pushed over by a bunch of primitives on a backwater world. But this victory came at a staggering cost. The war rendered Korriban desolate, transforming its surface into a lifeless wasteland of red sand and bitter memories. And even as he led his people to this impossible triumph, King Adus, the great Sithari, was killed in the fighting. The unifier was gone. The victory was hollow. The kingdom of the Sith held together just long enough for them to reverse engineer the Rakatan hyperdrive technology they had co-opted. With their homeworld now a ruin, most of the Sith fled, settling the ice planet of Zeost, along with outposts on worlds like Malachor V. They had finally escaped their cradle. They had beaten the galaxy's reigning champions and stolen the key to the stars. They had every opportunity to build something new, something greater. But the death of Adus left a power vacuum the size of a black hole. With their god, King gone, the fragile unity he had forged with his axe instantly shattered. Many among the Kisai priest caste immediately tried to take his place, and Sith civilization descended once again into a constant state of war. They had been given the galaxy, and they chose to go right back to squabbling over their own backyard. The victory over the Rakata taught them they were strong enough to fight anyone. But the death of Adus ensured they would spend the next 20,000 years fighting only themselves. The brand new, slightly used Rakatan hyperdrives worked. The Sith, or what was left of their scorched civilization, scattered from the desolate ruins of Korriban like rats from a sinking ship. Most fled to the frozen ice planet of Zeost, with others settling on backwater worlds like Malachor V. They had the keys to the galaxy. They had a fresh start, and they immediately proceeded to do absolutely nothing with it for the next 20,000 years. What followed was not an age of exploration or a bold new era of conquest. It was a great regression. As soon as the memory of King Adus grew cold, Sith civilization plunged right back into a constant state of war, the comfortable, familiar rhythm of self-destruction. This wasn't the natural cycle of violence they had known before. This was something more pathetic. These were the wars of petty kings scrambling over each other in a desperate, undignified pursuit of ultimate power. They were fighting over the scraps of a shattered kingdom, each one convinced he was Addis's true heir, each one proving through his spectacular failure that he was anything but. The most damning indictment of this multi-millennial tantrum is what was happening in the rest of the galaxy. While the Sith were busy stabbing each other in the back over who got the bigger throne room on Zeost, a new power was rising. The Galactic Republic emerged from the ashes of the Infinite Empire, and galactic civilization as we know it began to form. Great hyperspace lanes were charted, vast economic and political networks were built, and the Sith were completely and utterly irrelevant to galactic affairs. They were a footnote in a history book no one was reading, too busy with their internal dramas to be important on a larger stage. They were a cosmic joke, a once promising species that had peaked early and spent the next 20 millennia in a state of arrested development, with no real future to look forward to. The Sith did what all decaying civilizations do: they became obsessed with the past. King Addis was transformed from a historical figure into a mythologized god king. His title, the Sithari, warped into a messianic prophecy. It came to refer to a foretold perfect being, free of all restriction, one who would come to rule the Sith, destroy them, and then remake them into something greater. Some of the more literal-minded Kisai believed Addis himself would return from the dead to fix their broken society. Others, slightly more creative, saw the Sithari as a metaphorical heir, a spiritual successor to Addis's legacy. For millennia, they waited, clinging to the desperate hope that a prophesied hero would appear to save them from themselves. Of course, no such being came. Every now and then, a particularly ambitious warlord would get close to consolidating power. A Sith king named Darth, for example, almost managed to conquer all the splinter states. But almost doesn't get you a chapter in the history books. Every time one king got too powerful, the others would form a temporary, resentful alliance to tear him down, before immediately turning on each other again. It was a perfect, self-regulating system of failure. This bleak, monotonous cycle of incompetence finally broke around the year 7000 BBY. After nearly 20,000 years of trying, one Sith king named Hokogram Grosh actually managed to conquer all his rivals. He reunited the kingdom of the Sith, a feat no one had accomplished since Addis himself. He stood victorious, the undisputed ruler of a civilization that had finally gotten its act together. His timing was, to put it charitably, abysmal. The legacy of this 20,000-year slumber is one of profound, crippling stagnation. While the rest of the galaxy grew, the Sith festered. This long, dark age cemented their isolationism, their paranoia, and their obsession with internal power struggles over any kind of external ambition. It turned the Sith worlds into a pressure cooker of resentment and thwarted ambition, leaving them dangerously, desperately receptive to any new influence that might promise a way out of their self-inflicted misery. Hokogram Grosh, the king who had achieved the impossible, sat on his throne, polishing his new crown, no doubt feeling immensely pleased with himself. He was about to learn a valuable lesson about galactic politics. The moment you finally sort out your own house is precisely when new, uninvited guests decide to show up and track mud all over your floor. And these new arrivals weren't salesmen peddling faulty technology. They were something far more dangerous. The new visitors didn't arrive in a sleek, intimidating warship. They came in a sputtering, crippled galleon, a piece of cosmic driftwood crewed by the galaxy's most recent batch of political undesirables, a handful of dark Jedi, fresh off a spectacular military defeat. They weren't conquerors, they were refugees, which, of course, made their subsequent actions all the more impressive. To understand who these people were, you need to rewind the clock a century. Back in the Galactic Republic, a faction of Jedi decided the order's strict. No touching the dark side. Policy was cramping their style. This wasn't a simple disagreement over philosophy. These schismatics, as they were called, began using the dark side to warp life itself, raising armies of terrifying monsters they planned to unleash on the Republic. This kicked off a delightful 100-year-long conflict known as the 100-Year Darkness. As you might guess from the name, it ended badly for the Darksiders. The war culminated in their absolute thrashing at the Battle of Korbos, where their armies of soul-eating leviathans and zombie soldiers were finally crushed. The Republic, quite reasonably, wanted the 12 surviving leaders executed. But the Jedi Order, in a move of staggering, almost criminal naivete, refused. Believing that no one deserves execution, they loaded the 12 most dangerous terrorists in the galaxy onto a rickety ship and shot them into unknown space, hoping they would sit in a corner and think about what they'd done. It was perhaps the single most consequential act of misplaced optimism in galactic history. Instead of finding repentance, they found Korriban. These 12 survivors were the best and brightest of the fallen Jedi. Their leader was High General Ajonta Paul, a man who had personally killed more than a dozen Jedi back on Korbos. With him was Sorza Sin, a sorceress and self-proclaimed grower of living weapons and biological plagues, a woman whose hobbies included things that would make a Hutt blush. Guided by the Force, their crumbling ship homed in on Korriban, a world that, in Sorza Sin's words, screams the loudest for those who hear the dark side's call. When the exiles landed, they were immediately confronted by a welcoming party of local Sith. The Dark Jedi, tired, beaten, but still leagues beyond these primitives, subdued them with casual displays of force power and skill with their proto-sabers. The native Sith, whose entire culture was based on the principle that the strongest person in the room is the boss, were immediately and profoundly impressed. They called these newcomers the Gen Jedi and looked upon them with a mixture of fear and awe. This was a language they understood perfectly. The reigning Sith King, Hakagram Grosh, was a bit more cautious. He was suspicious of these powerful outsiders and tried to prevent them from infiltrating Sith culture, fearing they would steal the secrets of Sith magic. It was a sensible precaution, and it was utterly useless. Grosh failed to imagine the sheer scale of the new arrival's ambitions. With the help of the King's own treacherous second in command, The exiles infiltrated the Sith capital on Zeost, learned the local customs, studied the caste system, and systemically undermined the monarchy in a matter of weeks. They didn't just want to steal Sith secrets, they wanted to own the whole company. Once they deemed their homework sufficient, the exiles dropped the pretense. They proclaimed themselves gods and openly challenged Hackergram Grosh for the throne. Ajunta Paul faced the Sith King in single combat and, in a move of brutal finality, beheaded him with his own sword. He then claimed Grosh's throne for himself. This was the moment. This was the chemical reaction that created the Sith as the galaxy would come to know and fear them. The victorious exiles declared themselves the Lords of the Sith. It was a fusion, a synthesis of two distinct strains of evil. They took the raw, primal, brutal energy of the Sith species and combined it with the sophisticated, philosophical, and technologically advanced malice of the dark Jedi tradition. Sith magic and alchemy were fused with dark Jedi techniques, creating a new, far more potent order of Darksiders. The old king was dead, a headless monument to his own short-sightedness. The exiles, now calling themselves the Lords of the Sith, stood victorious. They had a planet, a worshipful populace of warrior, slaves, and a brand new empire to build. Now came the fun part, figuring out how to run the place without immediately reverting to the Sith's favorite pastime of killing each other. Having declared themselves gods and decapitated the previous management, the 12 exiles didn't waste time on victory parades. They immediately set about reshaping the entire Sith civilization to suit their goals. This wasn't a merger, it was a hostile restructuring from the top down. The Sith species were already warlike, but the new Sith Lords militarized their subjects even further, commissioning the construction of vast fleets of Derifan-class battleships. The goal was no longer just to win petty squabbles, it was to build a war machine capable of projecting power across the stars. The new shadow hand of the Empire, the delightfully unhinged Sauzas Sin, took a special interest in the military's biological weapons division. Combining her advanced life warping techniques with the crude alchemy of the Kisai, she created legions of ferocious Sith spawn. These weren't just war beasts. They were custom-designed nightmares, biological tanks of tooth and claw that the Sith armies would use to terrifying effect. To ensure a steady supply of these horrors, she formed an order of Kisai life, shapers called the Nia Shwad Zakut, which, for those of you without a degree in pretentious evil, translates to the cultivators of entrails. Their work, as you can imagine, was not for the faint of heart, but it would fuel the conquests of the Sith for centuries. Structurally, the new empire was a masterclass in controlled chaos. The 12 Sith Lords formed the first Sith Council, with Ajunta Paul taking the official title of Dark Lord of the Sith and Sauzas Sin as his number 2. The remaining 10 lords then carved up the empire between them, each claiming a swath of territory and a personal army. They ruled as petty kings, constantly at each other's throats, but ultimately beholden to the Dark Lord. It was a system designed to encourage ambition while theoretically keeping it on a leash. A recipe for the exact kind of infighting it was supposed to prevent, just with a fancier council table this time. They built a new, grand citadel on their capital of Zeost and another fortress back on Korriban, situated in a valley steeped in dark side power that emanated from an ancient Rakatan star map hidden in the caves below. This new order was built on a fusion of cultures. The exiles merged their dark Jedi techniques and ideology with the magic and traditions of the Kisai, creating the coherent philosophical basis for the Sith Order the galaxy would come to fear. But it was a lopsided merger. The Dark Jedi were few in number, and they wisely chose to assimilate into the broader Sith culture rather than try to remake an entire species in their own image. This was reflected in their choice of weaponry. Most of the exiles traded in their proto-sabers for the traditional, alchemically enhanced Sith swords, a practical concession to local customs. The most significant act of assimilation, however, was biological. Sorcerer Sin's alchemical genius allowed the human exiles to interbreed with the Sith species. They took on Sith partners and apprentices, and their lineages lived on in a new generation of Sith half-breeds. The exiles appear to have been quite prolific, because within just 2,000 years, these half-breeds were numerous enough to completely dominate Sith society. For many years, the 12 exiles ruled their new empire. But you can't put 12 hyper-ambitious, paranoid Darksiders in a room together and not expect a schism. A faction, led by a Sith Lord named Baron Draper, wanted to take their new armies and fleets back to the Republic to get their long-delayed revenge on the Jedi. Ajanta Paul and the others argued against it, believing the Empire wasn't nearly strong enough yet. Draper, in a fit of classic Sith impatience, ignored them and set out with his war fleet anyway. He was never seen again, presumably vaporized by the First Republic patrol he encountered. His only accomplishment was to inform the Republic that a Sith Empire now existed out in the unknown regions, putting them on the galaxy's watch list. The founding of the First Sith Empire established the institutions that would define the Sith for millennia: the Dark Lord, the Council, the Master-Apprentice tradition. They built a stable, expansionist state, but they built it on a foundation of pure nitroglycerin, the seeds of their own destruction. The constant infighting, the paranoid jealousy, and the all-consuming thirst for revenge were sown in the very soil of their new kingdom. With one faction of overly eager fools now a cloud of drifting atoms, the remaining Sith Lords settled in for the long haul. They had an empire to run and apprentices to train, but the exiles were mortal. As they grew old, stewing in the dark side energies of their Korriban fortress, their paranoia began to fester. They had conquered a kingdom together. Now it was time to see who would be the last one standing. The problem with building an empire on the principle of only the strong survive is that your co-founders are also strong and paranoid and armed. The first Sith Lords, the 12 exiles who had conquered a kingdom together, did not die of old age. They died of each other. As the years wore on in their dark side, infused fortress on Korriban, the camaraderie of shared exile curdled into suspicion. This, inevitably, led to plots, assassinations, and finally, an all-out battle within the fortress itself. The fighting was so ferocious that the entire structure collapsed, burying Ajanta Paul and the last of the original exiles under tons of rock and shattered ambition. In a final act of supreme Sith irony, they were laid to rest in elaborate tombs on Korriban, with Ajuntapauls being the largest. This began the grand tradition of the Valley of the Dark Lords, a magnificent necropolis dedicated to tyrants murdered by their closest associates. It's a beautiful tribute when you think about it. With the first generation of lords gone, the Sith Empire fell into a familiar pattern. It was now ruled by a mix of Sith purebloods and the new, fast-breeding half-breeds. But the engine of the Empire was constantly sputtering, hampered by endless infighting on the Sith Council. This squabbling wasted the Empire's strength in countless small, pointless civil wars, creating a dismal, endless cycle of growth and infighting. It was the same old song, just with a bigger orchestra and slightly more expensive instruments. This dismal rhythm of mediocrity persisted until around 6000 BBY, when a new kind of monster clawed his way to the top of the pile. His name was Tulak Horde, a Sith who would become known to history as the Lord of Hate and the Master of the Gathering Darkness. Horde was a master of many rare dark side techniques, most notably an obscure and deeply unpleasant ritual that allowed him to feed off the life force of his enemies during battle. It was a grimly efficient form of recycling, but he was perhaps most famous for his skill with a lightsaber. In an era where most Sith still preferred heavy, alchemically forged swords, Tulak Horde was one of the few who favored the more elegant blade, and he was by far the greatest lightsaber duelist of the ancient Sith, pioneering techniques that would be used for millennia. When he became Dark Lord, Horde began a campaign of conquest that was staggering in its ruthless efficiency. With his loyal Deshade servant, Cum Val, at his side, he crushed opponents on more than 100 worlds, more than doubling the size of the Sith Empire. He likely would have kept going, were it not for a cosmic inconvenience, the Stygian Caldera, a massive ring of nebulae that surrounded Sith space, acting as a natural hyperspace barrier that made further expansion all but impossible. Trapped within their corner of the galaxy, Horde focused on consolidating his power. He was, even for a Sith Lord, extraordinarily paranoid. He kept his techniques secret, regularly assassinated potential rivals, and trained only one apprentice, a man named Orton Celis. But despite his best efforts to eliminate all threats, he couldn't escape the fundamental logic of the system he now ruled. Tulak Horde was ultimately betrayed and killed by his own apprentice, who attempted to usurp his title. The Lord of Hate, master of 100 worlds, was brought down by the one person he chose to trust. The system worked. The legacy of Tulak Horde was to prove that a single, supremely powerful Dark Lord could still break the cycle and achieve greatness, briefly rekindling the myth of Adus. But his death proved the opposite point just as effectively, that the Sith ideology, with its baked-in treachery, made any lasting stability impossible. He had built a bigger, stronger cage, but he was still just a rat in it. Tulak Horde, the Lord of Hate, was laid to rest in the Valley of the Dark Lords, another magnificent tomb for another murdered tyrant. His death left a massive power vacuum, and the Sith, like clockwork, began tearing each other apart again. The cycle resumed. But after several more centuries of this bloody, pointless bickering, another Lord would rise. One who wouldn't rule just through hate, but through cunning. And he would usher in what the Sith, in their infinite arrogance, would call their golden age. The assassination of Tulak Hord by his own apprentice was, for the Sith, business as usual. The Empire once again devolved into a chaotic free-for-all, a galactic scale-bar brawl that lasted for several more centuries. It took another great Sith Lord to finally bring the chaos to an end. This one was an immensely powerful Sith half-breed, a burly, politically cunning brute named Marka Ragnos. Ragnos didn't just smash his way to the top. He manipulated, schemed, and forced his way through the Sith ranks with equal measure. When the reigning Sith Lord finally died in 500 BBY, Ragnos was one of two final candidates for the throne. His rival was another powerful lord named Simus, and as is tradition, they fought a duel for rule of the entire Sith Empire. Ragnos won, but in a wonderfully bizarre twist, Simus managed to survive through arcane Sith techniques, albeit as a disembodied, spectral head floating in a glass case. It's hard to command respect when you're a head in a jar, so Simus conceded the throne. In a move of sheer political genius, Ragnos allowed the head of his former rival to stay on the Sith Council, where Simus became greatly respected for his wisdom. It was brilliant. Ragnos not only defeated his primary opponent, but kept him around as a neutered advisor and a constant, floating reminder to everyone else of what happens when you challenge the boss. Marka Ragnos reigned for 100 years, a period that would be known as the Golden Age of the Sith. Under his iron-fisted rule, the Sith Empire experienced unprecedented prosperity and stability. He achieved this not by eliminating the Sith self-destructive tendencies, but by harnessing them. Ragnos was a master of political manipulation. He kept the Empire stable by pitting would-be usurpers and ambitious troublemakers against each other, allowing them to harmlessly destroy themselves without ever threatening the Empire as a whole. It wasn't an age of peace. It was an age of carefully managed, contained conflict. He didn't stop the backstabbing. He just turned it into a spectator sport that kept his rivals too busy and too weak to ever challenge his own rule. This masterclass in ruling sociopaths lasted until 5000 BBY, when Marka Ragnos died, apparently of natural causes. A Sith Lord dying of old age is so unlikely it borders on the comical. It was either the greatest testament to his absolute mastery of power, or the most successful assassination cover-up in galactic history. Either way, he was gone, and the system he had built was entirely dependent on him. His death immediately tore the Empire in two. Two new Sith Lords eyed the throne, each with a wildly different vision for the future. One was Ludo Kresh, a conservative and a traditionalist who sought to preserve the strength of the Sith by keeping them isolated. The other was Naga Sadow, a radical expansionist who wanted to begin a new age of conquest. They didn't even wait for the funeral of Marka Ragnos on Korriban to be over. The doors to his tomb in the Valley of the Dark Lords had barely been sealed before the two drew their swords and began battling for control of the Empire right there at the funeral service. The legacy of Marka Ragnos was the perfection of Sith governance. He created a stable, prosperous empire by turning the Sith's greatest weakness, their endless infighting, into his greatest tool of control. He proved it was possible to rule a society of monsters. But his system was a personality cult, entirely reliant on his unique genius for manipulation. The second he was gone, the entire, carefully balanced structure of managed chaos collapsed back into a simple succession crisis. The two rivals, Kresh and Sado, faced each other over the sarcophagus of their dead master, swords drawn, ready to tear the Golden Age apart. But before a killing blow could be struck, their battle was brought to a sudden stop. A ghostly figure appeared before them, the specter of Ragnos himself, back from the dead to deliver one final, cryptic warning. The future of the Sith was uncertain, he warned. A time of great change was at hand. He had no idea how right he was, because at that very moment, for the first time in nearly 2,000 years, an alien starship was appearing in the skies above Korriban. The ghost of Marker Ragnos faded, leaving his two would-be successors staring at each other, swords drawn. But the mood for fratricide was ruined. High above, a small hyperspace scouting vessel known to history as the Starbreaker 12 was landing right in the middle of the Valley of the Dark Lords. Its doors opened and out walked two young humans, a man and a woman, who claimed to come in peace from the Galactic Republic. Their names were Gav and Jory Daragon, and they were, without a doubt, the unluckiest tourists in galactic history. They were hyperspace explorers, brother and sister, who had fled poverty and trouble with bounty hunters on their scout ship. Thanks to their untrained force sensitivity, they had made a blind, desperate jump that flung them all the way from the core systems to the edge of the galaxy, right into the viper's nest of the Sith Empire. In doing so, they changed the course of galactic history. The Sith, not being known for their hospitality, took them prisoner the moment they stepped off their ship. Their arrival immediately split the Sith Council. Ludo Kresh, the cautious traditionalist, wanted them executed on the spot, fearing they were the vanguard of a Republic invasion fleet. Naga Sado, the ambitious expansionist, saw them not as a threat, but as an opportunity. He saw them as a living, breathing star map, a ticket to the thousands of Republic worlds just waiting to be conquered. After a passionate debate, the Council, in its infinite and predictable caution, sided with Ludo Kresh. The Daragons were to be executed. But Naga Sado was not a man who took no for an answer. He devised a plan of such ruthless, manipulative genius, it would become a textbook example for ambitious Darksiders for millennia. He had some of his loyal Masasi warriors steal a set of blasters from the Daragon's ship. He then used those blasters to stage a raid on the Citadel's dungeons, freeing the Daragons and making the whole thing look like a brazen Republic attack. To add a final, masterful touch of perfidy, Sado went to the chambers of his old mentor, the floating head of Simus, and murdered him with one of the blasters. He hoped the death of a respected council member would be enough to whip the other lords into a war frenzy. Sado had the Daragons brought to his personal fortress on the planet Kar Delba, then returned to the council chambers, feigning ignorance and shock as news of the attack arrived. His plan worked perfectly. Shaken by the suddenness and ferocity of the assault, the Sith Council voted to make Naga Sadow the new Dark Lord of the Sith, eager for revenge on the Republic. Ludo Kresh, however, refused to accept Sadow's victory. He secretly gathered his own fleet at his stronghold on the world of Relj. As Sadow prepared his own forces, Kresh and his allies attacked, bombarding Sadow's fortress from orbit. But they had fallen into a trap. Sadow's fortress was a decoy. His true stronghold and the bulk of his fleet were hidden on Kar Delba's moon. Sadow's fleet ambushed Kresh from behind, and then the Dark Lord struck the most devastating blow of all. On his command, the Massassi warrior crews serving on his rivals' ships rose up and murdered their lords, seizing control of the ships for Naga Sadow. Ludo Kresh, his fleet decimated and his allies dead, was forced to retreat. This was the Sith way of politics in its purest form. Sadow won the throne not through strength alone, but through deception, murder, and by exploiting the loyalties of the lower castes against their masters. He started a galactic war not for ideology or for the good of his people, but as a gambit in a domestic power struggle. With his rival licking his wounds and the rest of the council now marching to his tune, Naga Sadow was the undisputed Dark Lord of the Sith. He had his war. He had his army. Now all he needed was a tour guide. He planted a tracking device on the Starbreaker 12 and allowed Jory Daragon to escape back to the Republic. He kept her knave brother Gav with him, whispering promises of glory and liberation into his ear and making him an apprentice. The fleets of the Sith Empire gathered. The trap was set. The galaxy was about to learn the price of the Sith's ambition. Following the breadcrumb trail left by Jory Daragon's ship, the full might of the Sith Armada tore a hole in reality and flooded into the heart of the galaxy. Naga Sadow, orchestrating the chaos from his command ship, didn't waste a moment. He divided his massive fleet and ordered simultaneous attacks all across the Republic, hoping to catch the Republic Navy and the Jedi completely off guard with a strategy of pure shock and awe. His two greatest fleets were sent to hit the Koro system and the galactic capital of Coruscant itself. For a few terrifying hours, it worked. The Republic was caught flat-footed. Sith battleships rained death and destruction from above, deploying drop pods of snarling Massassi warriors and monstrous war beasts against the Senate Hall itself. Sadow seemed poised to capture the core of the galaxy in a single, brilliant stroke. But even the best laid plans of megalomaniacs can hit a few snags. A Jedi Knight named Odon, had foreseen the impending assault in a dream and had managed to rally the Jedi. More problematically, Empress Tata, the ruler of the Koro system, had believed his warnings and prepared a great war fleet in advance, turning her home system into a much harder target than anticipated. The true spanner in the works, however, was Sadow's own prized apprentice, Gav Daragon. In the middle of the battle, the knave young man abandoned his command post and traveled down to the surface of his homeworld, only to be confronted by the horrific damage the Sith attack had done. In that moment, he realized Naga Sadow had lied about everything. This wasn't a war of liberation, it was a savage conquest, and he was a willing pawn. Consumed by regret, Gav fled back to his command ship and flew toward the nearby red supergiant star, where Sadow had established his command center. Sado had been coordinating the entire war from a Sith meditation sphere, a bizarre and unique craft designed to channel the power of his arcane rituals and broadcast his magic across hyperspace. It was from here that he had bolstered his forces and directed their every move. Hoping to break his former master's concentration, Gav fired on the meditation sphere. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. In an instant, much of the Sith Empire's invading armies simply vanished. As it turned out, the vast majority of Sado's mighty fleet had been nothing more than illusions, phantoms conjured by his Sith sorcery. His grand army was a lie. Once the illusions disappeared, it became brutally apparent that the Sith were badly outnumbered and had overextended themselves catastrophically. The Republic Navy, led by a newly confident Jedi Order, launched a massive counterattack. One by one, the Sith fleets began to retreat in disarray. Realizing his grand gambit had failed, Naga Sado challenged Gav to a final duel aboard the crippled meditation sphere, only to sabotage the ship and retreat to one of his battleships as Gav boarded, leaving his former apprentice trapped. As a final act of spite, Sado used a powerful dark side weapon to destabilize the nearby star's core, hoping to use the resultant supernova to kill Gav and cover the retreat of his remaining forces. But before he was consumed by the explosion, Gav Daragon managed to send the Republic the hyperspace coordinates for the Sith Empire. When the tattered remains of Sado's invasion force limped back to Korriban, they found another Sith fleet waiting for them. It was commanded by none other than Ludo Kresh, who in Sado's absence had claimed the title of Dark Lord and taken control of the capital. Beside himself with fury, Sado ordered what was left of his forces to engage Kresh's fleet. Above their ancient homeworld, what remained of the military might of the Sith Empire destroyed itself. Sado's ships ultimately destroyed Ludo Kresh's flagship, but the battle had barely ended when Empress Tata's Republic fleet arrived in the system and opened fire on the survivors. The Great Hyperspace War was the Sith's explosive debut on the galactic stage, and it was a masterclass in failure. It was a conflict born not of ideology, but of one man's ego, and it revealed the fatal flaw of their order, a preference for cheap theatrics over sound strategy, and an inability to maintain unity, even for a moment. Naga Sado had led his people to the brink of conquest, only to personally shove them into the abyss. As the Republic warships opened fire on the last, crippled vestiges of his fleet, Naga Sado made one final, characteristic move. He ordered his remaining Massassi warriors to take command of the ships and fight to the death to cover his escape, then fled into the unknown aboard his flagship, the Corsair. The war was over. The would-be conqueror was gone. But for the Sith worlds he left behind, the nightmare was just beginning. The Republic was coming, and they were not in a forgiving mood. The Supreme Chancellor of the Galactic Senate was unwilling to let things end with a simple victory at Korriban. He ordered the mobilization of the entire Republic Navy for a full-scale invasion of Sith space, accompanied by the Jedi. The stated goal wasn't just punishment, it was the complete and total dismantlement of the Sith Empire, a final solution to the Sith problem. The invasion couldn't have come at a worse time for the Sith, who were already in the process of self-destructing. they barely had a fleet left to defend their skies. Their best warriors, their most powerful lords, and their would-be Dark Lord Ludo Kresh were all dead. Their actual Dark Lord, Naga Sadow, had vanished, leaving his second in command, Shah Dakhan, as the acting leader of a doomed empire. Shah Dakhan, unable to rally any meaningful defense, gave one last, futile order. He commanded the remaining Massassi to fight to the last man. It was a gesture that held the Republic back for a short time, but only served to make the inevitable bloodshed even worse. The might of the Republic and the Jedi proved too much for the blind battle fury of the Massassi. The Sith Empire ceased to exist. Now, the official Republic histories, written by the victors, are very clear on one point. Neither the Republic nor the Jedi carried out a genocide of the Sith species, as is sometimes claimed. And officially, that's true. They didn't line them up and execute them. The reality, however, was that the campaign all but eradicated the Sith purebloods. Many Sith who didn't die fighting the Republic chose to kill themselves in mass, ritual suicides, depopulating their own homeworlds one by one in a final, defiant act of self-annihilation. By the time the Republic declared victory, it seemed that there wasn't a single Sith left alive in the entire Empire. Their worlds, once the heart of a proud and terrible civilization, were rendered depopulated ruins, home only to beasts and the crumbling ruins of their once mighty cities. The Jedi had won, but their victory was not as absolute as they believed. Some Sith remnants escaped the bloodbath. A faction of heretics fled to the distant prison world of Tund. Another group of elite Massassi regrouped on the fortress world of Thule, just outside the Stygian caldera. A more insidious group fled to the acidic Republic world of Vijun, where they intermarried with the local human aristocrats, secretly passing Sith teachings down through their new bloodlines. And of course, there was Naga Sadow himself, slumbering on Yavin 4, and another, more radical faction that had gathered at Malachor V before fleeing into the unknown regions entirely. The Jedi Shadows, the Order's elite covert operatives, combed the ruins of the Sith worlds, gathering or destroying every Sith holocron, scroll, and artifact they could find, hoping to prevent any future Darksiders from learning their ways. They believed they were erasing the threat forever. The legacy of the Republic's counter invasion was the destruction of an empire and the near extinction of a species. But in their brutal efficiency, they had created a diaspora. They hadn't extinguished the Sith flame. They had scattered its embers across the galaxy, where they would smolder in secret, nursed by bitterness and a thirst for revenge. The Jedi believed the Sith were extinct. A bloody chapter of history finally closed. But in the shadows of forgotten worlds and in the hearts of bitter exiles, the story was far from over. One of those exiles, the son of the slain Ludo Kresh, was already planning his revenge, though his attempt would end pathetically when he partied too hard the night before his attack and died of a ruptured stomach. Other, smarter remnants knew to bide their time. And on a jungle moon far away, a fallen Jedi prodigy was about to stumble upon a sleeping evil that would change the galaxy forever. For 500 years after the Great Hyperspace War, the Sith were a ghost story, a cautionary tale the Jedi told their younglings. The galaxy moved on. Then, a young Jedi named Freedon Nard decided to change all that. Nard was a prodigy, recognized by his masters as being incredibly strong in the Force, more so than anyone they had seen for centuries. And he knew it. He dreamed of becoming the greatest Jedi that had ever lived. But the Jedi Masters saw his pride and refused to make him a knight until he learned humility. Outraged and believing the Jedi were deliberately holding him back out of fear, Nad, in a fit of supreme arrogance, killed his master and abandoned the order. Furious at the Jedi, Freedon Nard vowed to learn the ways of the Sith, not out of a deep philosophical calling, but purely out of spite. He traveled to the ruined worlds of the old Sith Empire and, on the planet of Asha's Re, he discovered a Sith holocron belonging to King Addus himself, an artifact the Jedi cleanup crew had somehow missed. The holocron taught him much, and it also gave him clues that led him to a forgotten jungle moon, Yavin 4. There, he was attacked on sight by the descendants of the Massassi warriors Naga Sadow had left behind. But Nad was a Jedi prodigy, and he held his own, eventually earning the respect of the warriors, who allowed him to access their ancient temples. Deep inside, he found what he was looking for. He discovered the sleeping form of Naga Sadow, who had been in suspended animation for over 500 years, and awakened him. The ancient Dark Lord, impressed by the young Dark Jedi's power and ambition, took Freedon Nad as his apprentice. Nad spent years on Yavin 4, learning everything the ancient master had to teach about Sith magic and alchemy. But eventually, Sadow had nothing left to give, and so, following the time, honored tradition of the Sith, Nad killed his master and usurped the title of Dark Lord of the Sith for himself. He abandoned Yavin 4 and returned to Republic space, looking for a world of his own to conquer. He settled on the jungle world of Onderon, a planet dominated by vicious beasts and home to a single, walled city named Iziz. Using his dark side power and the promise of advanced technology, Nard conquered Iziz and set himself up as its absolute monarch. His reign was long and brutal. He transformed Onderonian society, deeply embedding Sith teachings and ideology into the planet's culture. All who dared resist him were cast out of the city to fend for themselves in the jungles, a fate considered a death sentence. But some of these exiles survived, taming Onderon's ferocious beasts and becoming the Beast Riders, a rival society that waged a perpetual war against the Sith-led city. After more than a century of Nad's tyranny, the Jedi finally caught wind of what was happening and intervened. In the pitched battle that followed, Freedon Nad, King of Iziz and Dark Lord of the Sith, was defeated and slain. The Jedi believed that with his death, the unbroken chain of Dark Lords that had begun with Ajunta Paul was finally broken. But Nad's death was not the end of his influence. It was the beginning of his true legacy. His spirit lived on, a malevolent ghost that continued to exert influence over the city of Iziz. His royal descendants continued to serve the dark side in secret, guided by the specter of their dead ancestor. He had created a hidden dynasty of evil, a dark side infection that festered within the Republic for centuries. His greatest weapon was not his life, but his death. He became a powerful, lingering presence in the Force, a tutor from beyond the grave, waiting patiently for new students worthy of his dark knowledge. The Jedi left Onderon, believing the threat was neutralized. They had killed the king and sealed his tomb. But they had only killed the man. The ghost remained, a cancer in the Force, whispering dark secrets to his descendants. For centuries, Onderon was a secret bastion of Sith ideology, a time bomb ticking away at the heart of the Republic. And soon, two young, bored aristocrats from the core worlds would make a pilgrimage there, seeking answers from the dead. Frida Nad was about to get some new students. Just as the Jedi were patting themselves on the back for cleaning up Onderon, two visitors slipped into the city of Aziz during the chaos of the final battle against the Nadists. They were cousins, Satul and Alima Keto, aristocrats from the Empress Tata system in the core, and they weren't there for the scenery. They were there to meet with the disciples of a dead man. The Ketos were the product of 1,000 years of peace and prosperity in their home system. They were wealthy, privileged, and suffocatingly bored. In their ennui, they developed a fascination with the dark side and the Sith, forming a secret society with their fellow rich youngsters called the Krath. Named after an evil trickster god from Tatan mythology, it was less a serious dark side cult and more of a high society book club, but with more forbidden artifacts and dangerous chanting. Their quest for authentic evil led them to Onderon, where they hoped to learn real Sith techniques from the Nadist king. They got more than they bargained for. The spirit of Frida Nad himself saw great potential in the two Force, sensitive cousins. He instructed the king to give them a collection of Sith scrolls and, most importantly, a powerful amulet that had once belonged to the ancient Dark Lord, Naga Sadow. Just before the Jedi succeeded in banishing his spirit for good, Nad helped the cousins escape the planet. The torch of Sith knowledge had been passed. Back in the safety of their opulent home system, armed with genuine Sith artifacts, the Krath's games became deadly serious. Alima, gifted with the amulet, became highly skilled in the art of Sith sorcery and illusion. Her brother Satul, meanwhile, began organizing a political and military power base. Then, in 3997 BBY, they launched their coup. Using Alima's terrifying illusions to sow chaos and backed by military forces Satul had secured, the young aristocrats overthrew their own parents. In a final, gruesome act of patricidal cruelty, they murdered them by dipping them in molten carbonite. With their parents out of the way, the Keto cousins and their friends seized control of the 7 worlds of the Empress Tata system, one by one, formally withdrawing from the Galactic Republic. They quickly assembled an army of loyalists, gathering force, sensitives from across their new domain and training them in the Sith techniques they had learned. These new dark side adepts, most notably the terrifying Krath Death Witches, were backed by the full force of the Tetan military, which was thoroughly corrupted by Satul's influence and Alima's magic into a fanatical horde of loyalists willing to die in kamikaze attacks for their new masters. A joint Jedi and Republic task force attempted to intervene, but they were driven off, and the Ketos seized the Iron Citadel on the city of Sinagar as their new stronghold. The rise of the Krath represented a disturbing new vector for Sith influence. This wasn't an external invasion from a lost empire or a schism from within the Jedi Order. This was a homegrown threat a cancer born of decadence, boredom, and privilege deep within the heart of the Republic. The Krath proved that the allure of the dark side wasn't just for angry primitives or disgraced monks. It could be a fashionable accessory for the spoiled and entitled, making it a uniquely insidious internal threat. They were a grim sign that the Republic's own rot was beginning to create its own monsters. The rise of the Krath deeply troubled the Jedi, who feared a resurgence of the dark side was at hand. They were, of course, correct. But the spoiled cousins from the core were only half of the problem. Around the same time, on the quiet Jedi enclave of Dantooine, another young, arrogant Jedi Knight was developing his own unhealthy fascination with the Sith. His name was Exar Kun, and he was about to make the Krath look like amateur hobbyists. While the Krath were busy turning their home system into a fortress of angst-fueled evil, the Jedi Knight Exar Kun was embarking on his own dark side field trip. Arrogant, immensely powerful, and convinced he could understand the dark side to better defeat it, he ignored the warnings of his master and left the Jedi enclave on Dantooine to seek out the legacy of the Sith. His first stop was Onderon, where he posed as an archaeologist and tracked down the tomb of Freeden Nard on the moon of Dixon. Inside, he came face to face with Nad's ghost, who offered to share the secrets of the Sith. Nad guided him to ancient scrolls that contained star charts leading to the Sith homeworld of Korriban. Eager to learn more, Kun traveled to the Valley of the Dark Lords, with Nad's ghost as his spectral tour guide. While Kun was exploring the tomb of Marka Ragnos, Nad engineered a cave in, trapping the young Jedi under a pile of boulders and shattering his skeleton. Pinned and dying, Kun tried to call on the light side to heal himself, but the crushing darkness of Korriban prevented it. Nad gave him a choice: he die in the dark, or draw on his anger and hatred to survive. Terrified of death, Kun embraced the dark side, turning his rage into power and healing his broken body. He had made his choice. His training continued on Yavin 4, where the local Massassi captured him and tried to sacrifice him to one of Naga Sado's ancient Sith spawn. Nad helped Kun claim Sado's powerful Sith amulet, which allowed him to channel his anger into destructive energy beams, killing the beast. The Massassi, ever impressed by overwhelming violence, began to worship Exar Kun as their new master. Kun, in his first true act as a Sith Lord, decided he was unwilling to share his newfound power. He used the amulet to destroy Freeden Nad's spirit, ensuring no one else could learn from the ghost. While Kun was busy becoming a god, king on a jungle moon, the Jedi Knight Ulic Kill Droma was on his own path to damnation. To counter the threat of the Krath, Ulic proposed a dangerous plan to the Jedi Council. He would go undercover, pretend to fall to the dark side, and destroy the Krath from within. Before a final decision could be made, the Krath launched a surprise attack on the Jedi Conclave on Deniba, killing many Jedi, including Ulic's own master, Arkajeth. Crushed by guilt and grief, Ulic abandoned his mission of subtlety and decided to go through with his infiltration plan alone. Without the Council's assent, he traveled to the Krath capital of Sinagar, posing as a fallen Jedi looking to defect. The Krath leader, Alima Keto, saw through his ruse immediately. but she was intrigued by the powerful Jedi. Instead of killing him, she decided to make his fake fall a reality, seducing him with her power and drawing him ever closer to the dark side. During an attempted rescue by his Jedi friends, Ulic was taunted by Satal Keto, who revealed he had ordered the attack that killed Ulic's master. Enraged, Ulic killed Satal in cold blood. He had crossed a line, and he knew in that moment that he could never go back. It was at this point that the two falling stars finally collided. Exar Kun, now the ruler of the Massassi, learned of the Krath and saw these other disciples of Freedom, Nard, as a threat to his own power. He traveled to Sinagar to eliminate them, arriving in the middle of another Jedi attack. He infiltrated the Iron Citadel and confronted Alima Keto and Ulic Kill Droma. The two powerful Darksiders, Kun and Ulic, drew their lightsabers and fought. But as they battled, a strange thing happened. The two Sith amulets they wore, one given to Ulic by Alima, the other taken by Kun on Yavin 4, began to interact. They had both belonged to Naga Sado. The amulets flared, and the two men were thrown into a shared vision of the ancient Sith on Korriban. The spirit of Marka Ragnos himself addressed them from across 1,000 years, identifying them as beings of Sith prophecy. He branded their foreheads with Sith markings, anointing Exar Kun as the new Dark Lord of the Sith, and proclaiming Ulic Kill Droma his first and foremost apprentice. The vision faded. The ghost of the ancient Dark Lord was gone. Exar Kun and Ulic Kill Droma, once heroes of the Jedi Order, now stood together, united by a dark prophecy. They pledged to join forces, to forge a new Sith Empire, and to bring down the galaxy. After 1,000 years, the Dark Lords of the Sith had returned. But first, they needed an army worthy of the name. The new Dark Lord and his apprentice didn't waste time with pleasantries. Their first order of business was recruitment. Exar Kun's handful of Massassi warriors and Ulic's cult of Krath fanatics were not enough to take on the entire Republic. They needed more followers, more ships, more power. Exar Kun, ever the scholar of dark lore, secretly rallied the scattered remnants of the old Sith Empire, bringing the holdouts on worlds like Thol back into the fold. He recruited the deadly assassins of the Makrosa Order, who promptly seized control of the entire Tapani sector, including the vital shipyards of Fondor, for his cause. But Kun's most audacious move was to target the Jedi Order itself. He traveled to the Jedi homeworld of Ossus and preached to the Order's younger, more ambitious members, spinning tales of a new golden age and promising them power the Jedi Council was too scared to let them touch. He lured many of these disillusioned apprentices to his fortress on Yavin 4, where, with the help of ancient Sith spirits, he turned them to the dark side, forging them into his own Brotherhood of the Sith. Ulic Kill Droma, the military mind of the partnership, took a more direct approach. He sought out the Mandalorian Crusaders, a nomadic warrior culture led by the ruthless Mandalore the Indomitable, who had been harassing Republic space for decades. On the planet Kwa, Ulic faced Mandalore in single combat. He emerged victorious, and by their code, the defeat won him the Warlord's unwavering allegiance. The Mandalorian Crusaders, with their savage warriors and basilisk war droids, joined forces with the Krath. Together, Ulic, Alima Keto, and Mandalore led a series of brutal raids on vital Republic shipyards, capturing hundreds of vessels and amassing a fleet large enough to challenge the Republic Navy. In the year 3996 BBY, with their armies assembled, the Sith went to war. The Great Sith War was not a concerted effort of conquest. It was a series of loosely connected, chaotic rampages designed to sow terror and break the Republic's spirit. Early on, Exar Kun's forces unleashed a terrifying Sith superweapon, the Dark Reaper, which devastated several worlds. Ulic, horrified at the weapon's effects, secretly leaked information to the Jedi that allowed them to destroy it, a sign that some part of his former self still remained. The war's centerpiece was a daring assault on Coruscant itself. Ulic leaked false intelligence to the Republic, leading them to believe the Krath's next target was the remote outpost of Kemplex IX, drawing the Republic Navy away. With the fleet gone, Ulic, Alima, and Mandalore led the vanguard of their forces against their true target, Coruscant itself. They did massive amounts of damage, and Ulic personally captured the Republic military's main command center. But at the moment of triumph, Alima Keto, seeing a chance to rid herself of the fallen Jedi who had overshadowed her, ordered the Krath and Mandalorian forces to retreat, abandoning Ulic to be captured by the Jedi. Ulic was put on trial in the Great Senate Hall, but the proceedings were interrupted by a surprise attack. Exar Kun, flanked by Mandalore and his Massassi warriors, stormed the chamber. Using a powerful Sith spell to freeze the entire assembly, Kun rescued Ulic. Before leaving, he made a speech proclaiming the return of the Sith Empire. He then murdered the Supreme Chancellor and, on his way out, struck down his own former Jedi Master, Vodo Siosk Baz, with his newly crafted double-bladed lightsaber. Kun's speech was broadcast across the galaxy, a signal to his hidden followers within the Jedi Order. All at once, the members of his Brotherhood of the Sith rose up and attacked their masters, murdering many of the Order's most prominent leaders in a single, devastating Jedi pogrom. The Great Sith War was a new kind of horror. It wasn't an external invasion. It was the Republic's own heroes and institutions turned against itself. A civil war that threatened to burn the galaxy to the ground with its chaotic, nihilistic fury. With Ulic rescued and the Jedi Order reeling from the massacre of its masters, the two Dark Lords planned their next big attack. They tasked Alima Keto, the very woman who had just betrayed Ulic, to lead the offensive, a test of loyalty and a chance for her to redeem herself. She was given command of Naga Sado's ancient flagship, the Corsair, and its terrifying superweapon. The target was the Jedi's last major fleet concentration, but the real prize was something much, much bigger. Alima Keto, now in command of Naga Sado's ancient flagship, the Corsair, led her fleet to the Kron cluster. She hid her ships among the nebulae and waited for the Republic and Jedi counter-attack. When the Jedi fleet arrived to engage them, Alima unleashed the Corsair's ancient and terrible superweapon. It didn't just fire lasers, it ripped the cores out of the Kron cluster stars, destabilizing the entire cluster and triggering a chain reaction of cataclysmic supernovae. Alima, in her hubris, had planned for the explosion to wipe out the Jedi fleet. She had not, however, planned for the fact that the entire cluster would go supernova killing her, her followers, and the Jedi in one great, indiscriminate blast. The consequences were far greater than a single battle. The nearby planet of Ossus, the homeworld of the Jedi Order for 20,000 years, and the site of their great library, lay directly in the path of the expanding shockwave. The Jedi were forced into a frantic, total evacuation, a desperate scramble to save what millennia of knowledge and priceless artifacts they could before their world was cleansed by fire. During the chaos of the evacuation, Exar Kun and Ulic Kill, Droma paid Ossus a personal visit, looking to loot what they could from the great library before it was destroyed. As his Massassi servants crammed their ship with stolen scrolls, Ulic was confronted by his brother, Kay Kill Droma. Tay made one last, desperate attempt to reason with him, to pull him back from the brink. Ulic, enraged at his brother's continued attempts to redeem him from the power he had chosen, refused to listen. The two brothers fought a fierce lightsaber duel, which ended when Ulic cut down his own brother in a fit of dark side fury. The moment Kay died in his arms, the rage vanished, replaced by a crushing, all-consuming grief. As Ulic knelt over his brother's body, he was found by Nomi Sunrider, the Jedi Knight he had once loved. Seeing what Ulic had done, Nomi reached out with the Force and did something unprecedented. She used an arcane Jedi technique to utterly sever his connection to the Force, cutting him off from the very power that had defined and corrupted him. He was no longer a Jedi, no longer a Sith. He was just a man, empty and broken. With Alima dead in the supernova she created and Ulic now a powerless shell, the Sith war effort collapsed. The craft dissolved. The Republic Navy, regrouped and reinforced, spread out across the galaxy, destroying the remaining marauding Sith fleets one by one. Mandalore the Indomitable was defeated and killed on the jungle moon of Dexan, mauled by beasts after being shot down. The war machine that had terrified the galaxy now lay in pieces. Ulic, renouncing the Sith, gave the Jedi the last piece of information they needed, the location of Exar Kun's hidden stronghold on Yavin 4. Thousands of Jedi, supported by the Republic's Rim fleet, gathered in the skies above the jungle moon for a final confrontation. Defiant and unwilling to accept defeat, Exar Kun gathered his remaining Massassi followers and began a great and terrible ritual. He planned to use their life force to fuel a spell that would separate his spirit from his mortal body, allowing his consciousness to ascend and spread unchecked across the stars. He intended to become a god. The assembled Jedi, sensing the profound evil of the ritual taking place below, pooled their strength. They created a massive, shimmering wall of pure light side energy around the entire planet, containing Kun's ritual and turning its immense power back in on itself. It created a massive firestorm that swept across the entire moon, incinerating every last Massassi and destroying Exar Kun's physical body. His spirit endured, but it was trapped, a powerless prisoner within the stone walls of his now abandoned temples for all eternity. The war was over. The ashes of Ossus were cooling, and the spirit of Exar Kun was screaming into the silence of his jungle tomb. The galaxy took a breath, but the damage was done. Exar Kun had transformed the Sith from a people into a cause, an ideology that could corrupt anyone. and the chaos of the war had stirred other, older powers. On Deek-Sun, a new warrior picked up the mask of the fallen Mandalore, and far away in the unknown regions, a true Sith Empire, one that made Exar Kun's Brotherhood look like a disorganized rabble, was listening. They had been watching the Republic tear itself apart, and they were beginning to stir. With Exar Kun's Brotherhood dismantled, the Jedi ordered a great hunt, cleansing the galaxy of the monstrous Sith spawn he had unleashed. Within a few years, the mission was deemed a success. The Sith, for the second time, were declared more or less extinct. But in their tidy conclusion, they had forgotten about the other half of Kun's army, the Mandalorians. In the Battle of Onderon, the Mandalorian Crusaders had been defeated, and their leader, Mandalore the Indomitable, had died on the moon of Deek-Sun. But a new warrior took up his mask. He called himself Mandalore the Ultimate, and he was a different breed of leader. He completely reformed Mandalorian society, turning the scattered clans from nomadic warriors into a centralized, industrial military machine. As the Republic licked its wounds and the Jedi rebuilt their temple on Coruscant, the Mandalorian Neo Crusaders quietly began expanding, building their strength for a new crusade. 20 years after the defeat of Exar Kun, the Mandalorians began conquering systems just beyond the Republic's borders. The Galactic Senate, after much debate, refused to get involved. The Republic was still weak, and the Mandalorians were careful to avoid attacking official member worlds. It was a catastrophic failure of foresight. Over the next decade, the Mandalorians conquered a vast chunk of the Outer Rim, giving them the recruits and resources they needed for a more daring offensive. Then, in 39 and 64 BBY, they launched an all-out invasion of the Republic. For 2 years, the Neo Crusaders beat the Republic badly, smashing their navy in battle after battle and advancing as far as Duro in the core worlds. The desperate Republic asked the Jedi Order for aid, but the Council refused. The Order was still recuperating from its catastrophic losses in the war with Exar Kun. More importantly, many on the Council sensed that the Mandalorian Wars weren't what they appeared to be. They felt some darker force was behind the invasion and feared the war's brutality would draw younger Jedi to the dark side, creating another disaster. They wanted time to ascertain the true nature of the threat, but some Jedi refused to wait. Their names were Revan and Malak, two of the Order's most promising and charismatic knights. They believed the Jedi had a duty to join the fight and challenge the Mandalorians head on, regardless of the Council's orders. They ignored their masters, gathered a group of like-minded followers who became known as the Revanchists, and headed off to the front lines. The Council tried to apprehend them, but their hand was forced when Revan presented irrefutable proof of Mandalorian atrocities at the planet Cathar. The Council reluctantly granted him and his crusade their sanction. The Supreme Chancellor gave Revan the rank of Supreme Commander and put a third of the entire Republic military under his and Malak's direct command. The Mandalorian Wars were a turning point. On the surface, they were a brutal, conventional conflict. But beneath it all, the Jedi Council's paranoia about a hidden dark influence was entirely correct. Their cautious inaction, however, created a power vacuum within the Order. a vacuum filled by Revan. His defiant crusade would save the Republic in the short term, but at the cost of creating a new generation of Jedi hardened by war, disillusioned with their masters, and dangerously close to the very darkness they were fighting. The war wasn't just about fighting Mandalorians, it was a crucible, and it was forging the next Dark Lords of the Sith. With the Council's reluctant blessing, Revan and his Jedi Crusaders turned the tide of the war. Over the course of 2 bloody years, they slowly, brutally drove the Mandalorians back. But victory came at a cost. To defeat monsters, Revan and his followers found they had to become monstrous themselves. They began to make moral shortcuts, sacrificing entire planets to secure tactical victories. The Jedi Council had feared the war would draw Jedi to the dark side. They had no idea they were witnessing the birth of a new Sith Empire from within their own ranks. The final, bloody act of the Mandalorian Wars took place in 3960 BBY in the skies above the desolate world of Malachor V. Revan, now a master tactician hardened by years of brutal warfare, had cornered the last of the Mandalorian fleet. Here he would end the war, and here he would sacrifice his soul to do it. On his command, his lieutenant, a Jedi general named Mitra Surik, activated a horrific superweapon, the Mass Shadow Generator. The weapon was designed to annihilate the Mandalorian fleet, and it succeeded beyond all measure. But it also destroyed a vast portion of the Republic fleet that had been engaged in the battle, and it shattered the planet of Malachor V itself. The gravitational forces were so immense that thousands of beings, Jedi, Republic soldiers, and Mandalorians alike, were crushed into the planet's fractured crust, their agony creating a colossal wound in the Force. It was later noted that most of the Jedi and Republic officers who died in this accident were among those most critical of Revan's increasingly callous tactics. It was a purge, a cold and calculated move to ensure that those who remained in his fleet were loyal only to him. As the war ended in this horrific spectacle, Revan confronted and killed Mandalore the Ultimate in single combat. But with his dying words, the warlord revealed a terrible secret. The Mandalorians had been manipulated, goaded into war by the subtle influence of a true Sith Emperor hiding in the unknown regions. On the scarred surface of Malachor V, Revan found confirmation of this in the Treyus Academy, an ancient Sith fortress where he and Malak embraced the dark side, teachings they found within. Revan gathered his remaining loyal followers and headed into unknown space, claiming to be hunting down Mandalorian remnants. In reality, he and Malak were chasing the ghost that Mandalore had revealed. Their journey led them to the hidden Sith Empire and its immortal emperor, Vitiate, who tortured the 2 Jedi until they both fell completely to the dark side. He then sent them back to the Republic as his mind-controlled servants, the vanguards of his own invasion. But Revan's will was stronger than the Emperor had anticipated. He and Malak managed to break free of their master's direct conditioning. Yet they remained Darksiders, convinced by what they had seen that the Republic was too weak and corrupt to survive the coming invasion from the true Sith. In their twisted logic, the only way to save the galaxy was to conquer it themselves, to forge it into an empire strong enough to withstand the darkness to come. To do this, they needed an army. Revan recalled ancient legends of a Rakatan super factory, the Star Forge, a tool of the dark side capable of producing infinite fleets of warships. He and Malak, now driven by their new purpose, traveled the galaxy, locating the ancient star maps that would reveal its location. They found it, claimed the powerful station as their own, and from its command deck, they at last proclaimed themselves the new Dark Lords of the Sith, Darth Revan, and his apprentice, Darth Malak. Revan's fall is one of the great tragedies of the galaxy. He was not corrupted by a simple lust for power. He fell because he was willing to do anything to save the Republic from one threat, only to discover a greater one lurking in the shadows. He became a villain to fight a greater evil, a dark messiah whose methods were indistinguishable from the tyranny he claimed to oppose. His was a new kind of Sith, born not of ancient tradition, but from the Republic's own heroic ideals, twisted into a dark and terrible mirror. In 3959 BBY, just a few short years after saving the galaxy, Darth Revan and Darth Malak returned at the head of a massive invasion fleet. They appeared above the shipyards of Fawirost and opened fire on a Republic that still considered them heroes. They were the Dark Lords of a new Sith Empire, an empire built by familiar faces, led by war heroes, and powered by an infinite fleet. The Jedi Civil War had begun. The galaxy was stunned. Revan and Malak, the saviors of the Republic, had returned as conquerors. At the Battle of Fawirost, they proclaimed themselves the Dark Lords of a new Sith Empire and urged their former comrades in the Republic and Jedi Order to join them. And to the horror of the Jedi Council, many did. This new Sith Empire was uniquely insidious because it was homegrown. Its leaders were not alien invaders or mystical cultists. They were the celebrated heroes of the Mandalorian Wars. Their soldiers were Republic veterans. Their admirals were respected Republic officers. This was not a war against an external foe. It was a civil war in the truest sense. A battle for the soul of the Republic fought between former friends. Many in the military, and even some Jedi found it easy to switch sides, placing their loyalty in the proven leadership of Revan over the crumbling bureaucratic institutions they felt had failed them. Revan's approach to conquest was as pragmatic as it was brutal. He often kept local governments intact, simply grafting them into his military hierarchy under the oversight of a Sith governor. To many citizens on these conquered worlds, very little actually changed, apart from a greater push toward militarization. This softened the image of the Sith, making them seem less like monsters and more like a change in management. But behind this veneer of pragmatism was a terrifying war machine. The Star Forge fed Revan's empire an almost infinite supply of ships and war droids, allowing him to overwhelm the Republic's defenses. For 2 years, Revan's tactical genius was unstoppable. He systematically dismantled the Republic's defenses with surgical precision. Wary of the Star Forge's corrupting influence, he used it as little as possible, preferring to capture and utilize the Republic's own production facilities, which he took great care to leave intact. By the second year of the war, the Sith controlled a full third of the known galaxy. The Republic was on the verge of collapse, held together only by the heroic efforts of a young Jedi, knight named Bastila Shan, whose rare gift of battle meditation could turn the tide of entire battles. Recognizing Bastila as the linchpin of the Republic's war effort, Revan made her his primary target. In 3957 BBY, she led a small Jedi strike team in a desperate boarding action against Revan's flagship, hoping to capture the Dark Lord himself. They cornered Revan on his bridge, but as they confronted him, another Sith vessel opened fire, not on the Jedi, but on Revan's own ship. The order came from Darth Malak. Malak had long grown jealous of his master's power and had even lost his jaw in a lightsaber duel with Revan as punishment for his ambition. Now, he saw his chance. In one fell swoop, he hoped to eliminate his master and the Jedi's greatest champion, seizing control of the Sith Empire for himself. The Jedi Civil War was a conflict defined by betrayal on every level. It began with the betrayal of the Republic by its greatest heroes, was fueled by the defections of thousands of its soldiers, and climaxed with the ultimate Sith betrayal, an apprentice striking down his own master to seize power. This single act set the stage for a new, even more brutal phase of the war and created one of the most bizarre situations in galactic history. Revan was badly wounded, knocked unconscious by the blast from Malak's ship. He would have died had Bastila Shan not used the Force to keep him alive, pulling his body from the wreckage and bringing him back to the Jedi Council. The Council, with the Republic on the verge of collapse, now faced a desperate choice. They had their greatest enemy in their grasp, his mind a shattered mess. They decided on a desperate, last-ditch gambit. They would rebuild him. They would wipe his mind and give him a new identity, hoping to turn their greatest enemy into their greatest weapon. With Darth Revan presumed dead, Darth Malak claimed the title of Dark Lord and picked up right where his master had left off. But where Revan had been a surgeon, Malak was a butcher. His attacks became overwhelming, incredibly destructive, and he came to rely on the infinite power of the Star Forge to a far greater extent than Revan ever had, abandoning his former master's strategic caution. Meanwhile, the Jedi Council, with the Republic on the verge of collapse, enacted a plan of breathtaking moral ambiguity. They healed Revan's broken body, but used the Force to completely wipe his mind, implanting him with a new personality loyal to the Republic. They created a false identity for him as a simple soldier serving under Bastila Shan's command, hoping that, as they worked together, enough of his latent memories would resurface to lead them to the Star Forge, the hidden source of the Sith fleet. They would turn their greatest enemy into their greatest weapon. The plan was set in motion when Malak, obsessed with capturing Bastila, cornered her ship, the Endar Spire, above the planet Taris. Revan, Bastila, and a Republic war hero named Carthonasi were forced to flee to the planet's surface. After a harrowing escape from the world, which Malak bombarded from orbit to kill them, they traveled to the Jedi enclave on Dantooine. There, Revan had a vision of his past self discovering the first star map, and the Jedi Council, feigning ignorance, retrained him as a Jedi and sent him on a quest to find the remaining maps. What followed was a surreal journey across the galaxy as the former Dark Lord, with no memory of his past, began to retrace his own steps of conquest. he and his new allies found star maps on the desert world of Tatooine, in the Shadowlands of Kashyyyk, and on the ocean world of Manaan. Along the way, they were hunted by Malak's forces, even killing his new apprentice, Darth Bandon. Their quest led them to be captured by the flagship of Admiral Saul Karath, the man who had followed Revan from the Republic to the Sith. It was aboard this ship, the Leviathan, that Malak himself confronted them, and it was there that he revealed Revan's true identity to him, a crushing revelation designed to break his spirit. Malak then captured Bastila, taking her back to the Star Forge to be tortured and turned into his new dark side apprentice. Despite learning the horrifying truth of who he used to be, Revan remained committed to the light. He found the final star map on the ancient Sith homeworld of Korriban and led the Republic fleet to the remote Rakata system for a final, desperate assault on the Star Forge. The battle that followed was one of the largest in galactic history. Revan and his allies boarded the massive space station, fighting their way to the fallen Bastila. Through the powerful bond they had formed on their journey, Revan managed to pull her back from the darkness, and she turned her powerful battle meditation to aid the Republic fleet. Revan then went on alone to confront the man who was once his closest friend. In a final, epic duel, the redeemed Revan killed Darth Malak. He and his allies fled the station just as the Republic fleet destroyed its orbital stabilizers, sending the Star Forge plunging into the system's sun. The destruction of the Star Forge and the death of Darth Malak broke the back of the Sith Empire. With its entire senior leadership and its primary production facility gone, the now leaderless Empire tore itself apart in its own brief but destructive civil war. The Jedi Civil War had been won, but it was a strange and complicated victory, achieved through a plan of profound ethical ambiguity that involved brainwashing a tyrant and having him systematically undo his own evil work. In a single day, the Sith went from the verge of total victory to absolute defeat. The Republic celebrated Revan as a hero once more, the prodigal knight who had returned to save them. But the story was far from over. Revan, his memories now slowly returning, began to remember the real reason he had fallen in the first place, the threat of the true Sith. He disappeared again, heading into the unknown regions to fight a war no one else knew existed. And the remnants of his shattered empire, the strongest and most twisted of his followers, fled to the one place in the galaxy that echoed their pain, the dead world of Malachor V. After the Jedi Civil War, the Republic foolishly believed the Sith had wiped themselves out in a civil war. They hadn't. The strongest, most bitter survivors had fled to the one place in the galaxy that understood their pain, the dead world of Malachor V. A planet so steeped in death it was a wound in the Force itself. Here, in the ruins of the Traius Academy, the Sith took on a new, horrifying form. They came under the rule of the three greatest Sith Lords to emerge from the ashes of Revan's empire, a trio of monsters known as the Sith Triumvirate. The first was Darth Sion, the self-proclaimed Lord of Pain. He was a walking corpse, his body a shattered ruin of countless scars and broken bones, held together only by his constant pain and the dark side. Then there was Darth Nihilus, the Lord of Hunger. He was less a man and more of an entity, a walking wound in the Force created when Malachor V died. He was a black hole in living form, consuming all life around him with his mere presence, driven by a constant, insatiable hunger for the Force. He commanded a ghost fleet of derelict ships he had torn from Malachor's gravity, crewed by half. Living soldiers who were little more than extensions of his will. But both Sion and Nihilus were junior partners, apprentices to the master of the Traius Academy, Darth Traya, the Lord of Betrayal. Once, she had been a Jedi Master, and long ago, she had even been Revan's first teacher. Exiled by the Jedi Order, her bitterness festered until she became enthralled by the teachings of the Sith. Traya believed that Revan's war of conquest had been a mistake. The Republic, she claimed, was insignificant. To her and the other survivors, the only thing that had ever truly mattered was the complete and total destruction of the Jedi. If the Jedi were destroyed, then the Sith would be forever victorious, no matter who ruled the galaxy. Thus, the Triumvirate abandoned grand strategy and instead waged a series of shadow wars, a campaign of targeted extermination known as the First Jedi Purge. Sion and his assassins hunted down and slew dozens of Jedi across the galaxy. Wherever groups of Jedi gathered, Darth Nihilus would sense their presence through the Force and descend upon them, feeding on them and the unfortunate planets where they happened to be hiding. The horrifying climax came in 3952 BBY. What remained of the Jedi Order gathered on the planet Qatar to try and determine what was hunting them. But their meeting only acted as a beacon for Nihilus. He arrived and consumed the entire planet, killing every Jedi and all other life in an instant. The Jedi Order, for all intents and purposes, ceased to exist. With their great enemy finally destroyed, the Sith Triumvirate immediately did what Sith do best: they fell apart. Sion and Nihilus allied against Traya, using their combined power to sever her connection to the Force and exile her. They then went their separate ways, each proclaiming himself the one true Dark Lord of the Sith. Their shared victory had rendered their alliance obsolete. But one Jedi had survived the purge. Mitra Surik, the Jedi exile who had served under Revan in the Mandalorian Wars and activated the mass shadow generator. Her actions at Malachor had created a wound in the Force so great that she was forced to sever her own connection to it to survive, and she was exiled by the Jedi Council. Now, the exiled Traya, calling herself Kriya, sought out the exile, while Sion and Nihilus hunted her, believing her to be the last of the Jedi. The Triumvirate represented the Sith ideology taken to its most nihilistic conclusion. They didn't want to build, they only wanted to destroy. Their legacy was one of pure, unadulterated annihilation, both of their enemies and, ultimately, of themselves. With the Jedi Order in ashes and the Triumvirate shattered by its own success, the last remnants of the Sith hunted the one person they believed to be the last Jedi. But the exile, guided by the enigmatic Kriya, would not be an easy target. She began a journey to find the few surviving Jedi Masters who had gone into hiding, all while the forces of Nihilus and Sion conspired to destabilize what was left of the broken Republic. The Dark Wars were not over, they had simply entered their final most personal phase. As the Jedi exile, Mitra Surik began her quest to find the lost Jedi Masters, the splintered Sith factions continued their shadow war against the Republic. Darth Nihilus's forces backed a secessionist movement on the world of Onderon, hoping to destabilize the system and create an easy target for his hunger. Darth Sion and his assassins, meanwhile, continued their hunt for any Force sensitives they could find, sowing terror across the Outer Rim. Surik traveled the galaxy, gathering allies and thwarting the Sith's plans. She intervened in the Onderon civil war, ensuring the Republic-aligned Queen remained in power and denying Nihilus his prize. During her travels, Nihilus sent his apprentice, a Meraluka woman named Visas Ma, whose people had been consumed by Nihilus on Katar, to assassinate the exile. But Visas, confronted by Surik's light, defected and joined her cause. Surik even confronted the seemingly unkillable Darth Sion on the ruins of Korriban, fighting him to a stalemate. But unbeknownst to Surik, her entire journey was being manipulated by her enigmatic mentor, Kreia. When the exile finally gathered the 3 surviving Jedi Masters on Dantooine, Kreia revealed her true identity as Darth Traya, the Lord of Betrayal. In a single, devastating act, she murdered all 3 Masters, snuffing out what little of the old Jedi Order remained. Traya then gave Darth Nihilus a false tip, luring him to the planet Telos IV with the promise of a hidden Jedi Academy to consume. Telos was a vital Republic restoration project, and its destruction would cripple the Republic's hopes of recovery. Nihilus's ghost fleet arrived and began its horrific consumption of Telos, but Surik and her allies raced to the planet's defense. She and Visas Ma boarded Nihilus's flagship, the Ravager, to confront the Lord of Hunger directly. Nihilus tried to consume Surik as he had countless others, but he found himself unable to touch her. Her unique nature as a wound in the Force, a void created at Malachor V, made her an echo he could not devour. With Visas's help, Surik attacked and destroyed the entity known as Darth Nihilus. With one Dark Lord dead, Surik and her allies traveled to the heart of the wound itself, Malachor V, to stop Traya. There, Traya's true, nihilistic goal was revealed. She sought to amplify the wound in the Force at Malachor, creating an echo so powerful it would sever the entire galaxy's connection to the Force, which she had come to hate with every fiber of her being. Surik fought her way through the Trayus Academy. She confronted Darth Sion one last time, and instead of just killing him, she convinced him to finally let go of the pain that bound him to life, allowing him to embrace the peace of true death. Finally, she faced and defeated her former master, Darth Traya. As her last act, Surik ordered the reactivation of the Mars Shadow Generator, destroying Malachor V for good and cleansing the great wound in the Force that had poisoned the galaxy for years. The end of the Dark Wars was not a simple victory. It was a form of healing. Mitra Surik didn't just destroy her enemies, she redeemed one, saved another, and cleansed a planetary-scale wound in the fabric of reality. Her journey proved that the greatest victory over the dark side is not to crush it with power, but to understand its nature and let it go. With the Triumvirate destroyed and Malachor V erased from the galaxy, the Dark Wars were over. The Republic and the Jedi had won, but only because an exiled outcast had finished the job for them. Surik's journey, however, didn't end there. As Malachor broke apart, she traveled into the unknown regions, seeking her old general, Revan. The Jedi Council had been right all those years ago. There had been something darker behind the Mandalorian Wars, an evil that Revan had gone to fight alone. The Sith of the Triumvirate were just an aftershock. The earthquake was still coming. To understand the earthquake that was coming, we have to go back, way back over 1,000 years to the chaotic end of the Great Hyperspace War. While Nagasado was fleeing into exile and the Republic was busy liberating, the Sith homeworlds, one group of Sith purebloods and their leaders held together. Led by a Sith Lord named Vitiate, they retreated into the swirling chaos of the unknown regions, vanishing from the galaxy's stage. For 20 years, they wandered in the darkness, a flotilla of refugees searching for a new home. They eventually stumbled upon the forgotten, perpetually storm-racked world of Dromund Kaas, a planet steeped in dark side energies. Here, they settled and began the long, slow process of rebuilding their empire in total secrecy. These were the true Sith, the direct cultural and genetic successors of the original empire founded by the exiles, and for 1,000 years, they lay low, patiently gathering their strength. Their leader, Vitiate, proclaimed himself the new Dark Lord and, more audaciously, the immortal emperor of his people. And he wasn't exaggerating. Years earlier, before leading his people into the darkness, Vitiate, then known as Tenebrae, had performed a ritual of terrifying power. On his original homeworld of Nathema, he had absorbed the life force of every living thing on the planet. Every man, woman, child, animal, and plant, and used that energy to grant himself eternal life. He was a true immortal, and he used that endless lifespan to play a game of galactic strategy with a patience no mortal could ever match. For over 1,000 years, he meticulously built his forces, expanded his fleets, and established a vast network of spies throughout the Republic, all while the Jedi thought the Sith were extinct. It was this hidden emperor who was the true puppet master behind the Mandalorian Wars. He was the dark influence the Jedi Council had sensed but couldn't identify. When Revan and Malak came, searching for the source of the manipulation, Vitiate captured them, tortured them until their minds broke, and they fell to the dark side, and then sent them back as his mind-controlled pawns to soften up the Republic for his own invasion. The plan backfired when Revan's formidable will allowed him to break free of the Emperor's conditioning and start his own Sith empire. But Vitiate, ever patient, simply waited. He watched the Jedi Civil War and the subsequent Dark Wars tear his enemies apart, all while continuing to build his own strength. After the end of the Jedi Civil War, the redeemed Revan, his memories returning, ventured back into the unknown regions to stop the Emperor. He was captured once again. For 3 years he was imprisoned on Dromund Kaas, until he was freed by an unlikely duo, his former lieutenant, the Jedi exile Mitra Surik, and a Sith pureblood named Lord Scourge. Scourge had foreseen that a Jedi would one day destroy the Emperor and allied with them, believing Revan was this chosen one. But just as they prepared to strike, Scourge had another vision and realized Revan was destined to fail. to preserve his own life so he could aid the true chosen one. When the time came, Scourge betrayed them. Mitra Surik was struck down, and Revan was captured and put into stasis, a living battery the Emperor could feed on, where he remained for the next 300 years. Vitiate's hidden empire recontextualizes centuries of galactic history. The great conflicts that had scarred the Republic were merely aftershocks of his patient, malevolent design. His empire was different. It was disciplined, unified, and led by an immortal god, king who was utterly devoid of the petty rivalries that had crippled every other Sith incarnation. They were not just another threat. They were the original threat, returned with a vengeance. For 300 years, Revan remained frozen in stasis, a prisoner of the Emperor he had tried to stop. For 300 years, the Sith Empire continued to operate in the shadows, gathering its strength. By 3681 BBY, the Republic had been weakened by centuries of conflict and political decay. The Emperor's spies were in place. His fleets were ready. After more than 1,000 years of patient preparation, the time had finally come. The true Sith were about to re-emerge, and the galaxy would burn. In 3060-81 BBY, the reconstituted Sith Empire emerged from the unknown regions and waged war. After more than 1,000 years of patient preparation, the time had finally come. Out of seemingly nowhere, a massive Sith fleet tore into the Outer Rim territories. Their first target was their ancestral home of Korriban. The Jedi had maintained a small garrison on the world for centuries, but they and their Republic trooper allies were quickly overwhelmed by the 30 Imperial warships led by Sith Lord Vindican and his apprentice, Malgus. Just like that, the Sith had their holy world back. This was not a chaotic invasion. It was a meticulously planned storm. The Emperor had spent centuries placing his pawns. As Imperial warships appeared in other sectors, they engaged in psychological warfare, allowing Republic diplomatic vessels to get a good look at the size of their fleet before obliterating them. When the Republic finally sent a sizable military fleet to respond, they were lured into a trap in the Tingle Arm, where the Emperor's secret allies sprang it, destroying the Republic force utterly. The Sith advance was merciless. They destroyed key starship manufacturing facilities and executed any civilians or local governments that refused to swear immediate fealty to the Emperor. The Galactic Senate, in a display of its now trademark incompetence, was too busy arguing about the nature of the threat to take effective action. It fell to the Jedi Order, for once quicker, to recognize the existential threat, to take the lead. Their heroism inspired the Shell, shocked Republic to finally stand with them, launching counterattacks where they could. But the tide of the war was overwhelmingly in the Sith's favor. Over the next 10 years, the Empire was relentless. They won major battles at Balmorra. They took the dark world of Dathomir, and they captured the vital aquatic world of Manaan, a devastating blow to any war effort. By the time they took the planet Aldegan, the Sith controlled nearly half of the entire Outer Rim. From there, they drove inwards, setting their sights on the critical manufacturing world of Bothawawi in the Mid-Rim. Here, the Republic managed to pull itself together enough to force a brutal stalemate. The Republic forces won the initial victory, but the Imperials, unwilling to lose, sent a vast force to counterattack. The fighting was vicious. The Sith accepted staggering losses, 10 Imperial troopers dead for every 1 Republic soldier. But their fanaticism and numbers were overwhelming. They eventually won the planet, but at a huge cost. The opening decade of the Great Galactic War was a brutal wake-up call for a complacent and decayed Republic. It proved that this was an entirely new kind of Sith enemy. They were patient, strategically brilliant, and possessed seemingly limitless resources and fanatically loyal soldiers. These initial victories were not just military conquests. They were the result of 1,000 years of meticulous planning, infiltration, and psychological warfare. The Emperor wasn't just waging a war, he was executing a plan that was centuries in the making, and the Republic was already a decade behind. The brutal meat-grinder victory at Bothar Wui showed the Republic the grim reality of the war they were facing. They had managed to slow the Imperial advance, but they were bleeding. The Empire's greatest psychological weapon, however, wasn't its endless legions. It was a council of 6 Sith Lords whose only job was to weaponize fear itself. And a small Republic strike team was about to be sent on a desperate mission to capture them. The Republic, reeling from its losses, knew it had to strike a blow against the heart of the Empire's psychological warfare. Their target, the Dread Masters, 6 ancient Sith united by a force bond who could project terror across entire fleets. A Jedi Knight led a strike team on a desperate mission, and against all odds, they succeeded. The Republic captured the Dread Masters and sealed them away in the secret prison world of Belsavis. Their loss was a huge blow to the Sith war effort, and for a moment, a glimmer of hope appeared for the Republic. That hope ignited when the war, previously confined to the outer and mid-rims, finally came to the core. Darth Malgus, the hero of the battle for Korriban, led an attack on the noble world of Alderaan. He lured the protecting Republic fleet away before striking, but his invasion was met by a fierce defense from local troopers and a small group of Jedi led by Seital Shan, a descendant of the legendary Revan and Bastila. In a stunning turn of events, Seital Shan managed to seriously injure Malgus, and the Battle of Alderaan ended in a decisive Republic victory. It was a massive, much-needed morale boost for the entire Republic. Spurred on by their success, the Republic retook several worlds in the Mid-Rim. The Sith Empire, recognizing the need for a new edge, meddled in Mandalorian affairs, installing a puppet Mandalore who united the clans. At the Empire's behest, this new Mandalorian army blockaded the Hydean Way, one of the Republic's most critical trade routes. The blockade crippled the Republic, causing food riots on Coruscant and forcing fleets stationed in the outer territories to retreat. Though the blockade was eventually broken, the damage to the Republic's war effort and its morale was undeniable. The war dragged on. After another Imperial offensive that saw the Sith pushing closer to the core than ever, butchering any who stood in their way, the Empire did something shocking. At the height of their military success, they offered the Republic a chance to negotiate for peace. The Jedi were, quite rightly, suspicious, but the Galactic Senate recognized the grim truth: they couldn't win this war. Hoping at the very least to buy some time, a delegation of top Republic and Jedi diplomats, led by Grand Master Zim, was sent to Alderaan to discuss the terms of the treaty. It was a trap. While the Republic's leaders were politicking on Alderaan, a massive Sith fleet, led by Darth Malgus, appeared in the skies above Coruscant itself and began bombarding the capital mercilessly. In what became known as the sacking of Coruscant, the planet was invaded, occupied, and broken. The Jedi Temple was bombed into rubble, and Sith warriors stormed the ruins to slaughter any Jedi they found within. Malgus and his forces slew the Supreme Chancellor and took the entire planet hostage. The sacking of Coruscant was the ultimate expression of the Emperor's philosophy: victory through overwhelming force, guided by absolute treachery. It was a military and psychological masterstroke that shattered the Republic's will to fight. The war wasn't won on the battlefield, it was won at the negotiating table, where one side was arguing in good faith and the other was just waiting for the signal to burn their enemy's capital to the ground. With a blaster to the head of the galaxy, the peace delegation on Alderaan had no choice but to accept the Empire's terms. The Treaty of Coruscant was signed. It wasn't a treaty, it was a surrender. The Republic was forced to cede even more worlds and officially recognize the Sith Empire as the legitimate ruler of half the galaxy. The Great Galactic War was over. The Sith had won. And now, in the cold, tense peace that followed, the two galactic superpowers would enter a new kind of conflict, a Cold War, fought not with fleets, but with spies, proxies, and assassins. The ink on the Treaty of Coruscant wasn't even dry before the blame game started. In the Republic, the shell-shocked populace and its politicians turned on the Jedi Order, blaming them for the defeat, even though the Jedi had been the ones leading the fight when the Senate was still debating the nature of the threat. Faced with the Republic's scorn, and with their temple on Coruscant a smoldering ruin, the Jedi gathered what was left of their numbers and retreated to their ancient homeworld of Tython to rebuild. They were still committed to protecting the Republic, but they took a step back from the galactic stage. On the Sith side, an even stranger thing happened. The Emperor Vitiate, having achieved his 1,000-year goal of bringing the Republic to its knees, seemed to lose interest in his own empire. He left to pursue his own mysterious goals, leaving the Dark Council he had founded to handle the day-to-day administration of their vast new territory. This created a restless balance between the two galactic powers. The Great Galactic War was over, but the peace was a lie. Open war simply gave way to a Cold War. For the next decade, both sides schemed to undermine the other. They fought over worlds like the war-torn industrial planet of Balmora, the recovering ecumenopolis of Taris, and the noble houses of Alderaan. They battled for resources, like the valuable poisons mined on Voss. But instead of fleets, they fought with spies, with proxy forces, and with small, elite covert ops teams. It was a dirtier, more personal kind of warfare, a decade of assassinations and shadow conflicts where tensions grew higher with each passing year. It was during this time that a ghost from the past returned, guided by a strange, unfamiliar spirit in the Force. The Republic discovered the location of a secret Imperial prison called the Foundry. A strike team was dispatched to storm the prison. And there they were stunned to find none other than Revan himself, freed from 300 years of stasis. It was later revealed that the spirit of Mitra Surik, the Jedi exile, had guided them to her old friend. Once freed, however, Revan vanished again, choosing not to involve himself in the ongoing Cold War. At the same time, another Jedi, a prodigy who would become known as the hero of Tython, made a staggering discovery. Lord Scourge, the Sith who had served the Emperor for centuries, realized that this new Jedi was the true figure from his vision, the one destined to defeat the Emperor. With Scourge's help, the hero of Tython managed to confront the Emperor Vitiate in his throne room and strike him down. The Emperor's host body was destroyed, and for a time, the galaxy breathed a sigh of relief, believing the immortal tyrant was finally dead. The Cold War was a decade of simmering hatred that changed the galaxy. It normalized espionage and proxy conflicts as the main tools of galactic politics. The supposed death of the Emperor didn't bring peace. Instead, it destabilized the Sith Empire, as ambitious members of the Dark Council were now free to pursue their own agendas without the Emperor's oversight, creating an even more chaotic and unpredictable political landscape. The Emperor was dead. Revan was back. The Republic and the Empire had spent a decade bleeding each other dry in dozens of secret wars. The fragile peace was at its breaking point. In 3643 BBY, just 10 years after the Treaty of Coruscant was signed, the Cold War finally turned hot. The Galactic War was upon the galaxy, a continuation of the old conflict, but this time, the Sith Empire was a fractured beast, with multiple heads snapping for control, and one of them belonged to a familiar, metal-jawed face from the past. The Cold War ended not with a treaty, but with a full-scale invasion. The newly declared Galactic War reignited old disputes, with Republic and Imperial forces clashing openly across the stars. The epicenter of the new war was the vital core world of Corellia, where both factions launched a huge offensive. The Sith laid claim to the world first, with 3 members of the Dark Council on the planet to personally coordinate the ground assault. They seemed poised to overrun the planet's defenses, but the local Green Jedi enclave held them off long enough for the Republic and their Jedi allies to swoop in and repel the invading forces, securing a major victory for the Republic. While this was happening, another front opened up. On the secret prison world of Belsavis, an Imperial strike team managed to liberate the Dread Masters, the 6 powerful Sith Lords captured decades earlier, who were now thought to be long dead. Their return unleashed a new, chaotic third party into the conflict. The Sith Empire, without the unifying will of its Emperor, began to fracture from within, while Republic and Imperial forces fought over valuable crystal resources on the ice world of Elam. Darth Malgus, the hero of the sacking of Coruscant, revealed he had turned traitor. He sought to become the new Emperor, but his vision was radically different. He envisioned an empire free of the petty squabbles and human-centric xenophobia of the old one, an empire that recognized the potential in all species. He sought to remake the Sith into something that wouldn't keep destroying itself. In the end, however, he was defeated by a combined force of Republic heroes and Imperial loyalists who saw him as a traitor to the throne. In a moment of supreme irony, the two warring powers briefly teamed up to destroy the one man who might have made the Sith Empire a more stable, less cartoonishly evil entity. With Malgus gone, the now free Dread Masters became the galaxy's next major headache. The Emperor had been the only being they considered their superior. With him gone, the 6 Lords of Dread sought to subjugate all life to their rule. When one of their own was slain in the fighting, their plan devolved into pure nihilisms. They sought to destroy everything, including themselves. The Dread War, as it was called, was so catastrophic that it forced the Republic and the Empire into their first, uneasy alliance against a common enemy. They didn't outright work together, but they at least stopped shooting at each other long enough to deal with the insane Sith Lords. Mercifully, the Dread Masters were eventually slain. With the third-party threats of Malgus and the Masters dealt with, the Republic and the Empire immediately went back to their regularly scheduled programming of trying to annihilate one another, fighting over resources like Isotope 5 on the planet Makib. The Galactic War demonstrated that the Sith Empire, without its immortal leader, was fundamentally unstable, prone to producing dangerous heretics and nihilistic psychopaths in equal measure. But it also proved that even when faced with existential threats, the Republic and the Sith would inevitably return to their endless, grinding conflict, a war no one could truly win because the underlying hatred was too deep. For years, the Galactic War raged on, a bloody stalemate of attrition. But just as the two superpowers were locked in their death grip, a new conspiracy was uncovered. Traitors were found on both sides working for a secret order, an order that didn't follow the Republic or the Empire. They followed a man who was supposed to be a hero, then a villain, then a hero again. They followed Revan, and they were about to drag the whole galaxy into their leader's personal, obsessive vendetta. The Galactic War was suddenly interrupted by a series of bizarre, coordinated attacks. Republic and Imperial forces simultaneously launched devastating assaults on each other's most sacred worlds, heavily damaging the new Sith Academy on Korriban and the rebuilt Jedi Temple on Tython. It was soon discovered that this was not a coincidence, but the work of traitors on both sides. They belonged to a secret order, the Revanites. This cult followed neither the Republic nor the Empire, but Revan himself. They believed that the immortal Sith Emperor, Vitiate, could not be defeated as a spirit. The only way to kill him for good was to resurrect him in a physical form first. Their plan was to destabilize the entire galaxy, forcing both the Republic and the Sith Empire to the brink of collapse, creating enough chaos and death to fuel a ritual that would draw the Emperor out so they could finally destroy him. The conspiracy was uncovered by an unlikely pair, Theron Shan, a top Republic spy and the son of Grand Master Satal Shan, and Lana Beniko, a pragmatic and powerful Sith intelligence agent. Realizing they had a mutual enemy, they formed an uneasy alliance. With the help of a prominent hero of the war, they set out to foil the Revanites' plans on worlds like Manan and Rakata Prime. On the pirate haven of Rishi, they managed to expose the full extent of the Revanites' manipulations just moments before the Republic and Imperial fleets, tricked into a confrontation, were about to annihilate one another. This startling revelation led to an unprecedented summit. Satal Shan, the Grand Master of the Jedi Order, and Darth Maul, the de facto leader of the Sith Empire's Dark Council, agreed to a temporary truce and a joint operation on Yavin 4, where Revan was preparing to resurrect the Emperor. For the first time in galactic history, the Republic and the Sith Empire officially worked together. They set up a joint base camp on the Jungle Moon, a surreal site where Imperial troopers, Sith Lords, Jedi Knights, and Republic soldiers intermingled with deep suspicion. Their common enemy was Revan. On Yavin 4, they discovered the tragic truth. When Revan had been freed from his 300-year imprisonment, his psyche had fractured. His light half simply wanted to rest and become one with the Force. But his dark half, consumed by his hatred for the Emperor, had set out on this obsessive, destructive crusade. The combined Allied forces fought their way through Revan's loyalists to the temple where he had constructed a massive ritual sacrifice machine. He planned to use the life force of everyone on Yavin 4 to bring the Emperor back, only to then kill him in his newly vulnerable state. The Joint Strike Force managed to destroy the machine and then confront and defeat Revan himself. With his all-consuming hatred finally quenched by the battle, his dark and light halves were able to merge. Revan, whole and at peace for the first time in centuries, thanked his allies and enemies, let go of his long struggle, and finally became one with the Force. The Revenant crisis was a bizarre, tragic postscript to the life of one of the galaxy's most legendary figures. His final crusade, born of a fractured mind and a noble goal pursued through terrible means, ironically forced his oldest enemies into an alliance and finally gave his own tortured soul peace. With Revan gone and his cult dismantled, the Republic and Sith forces quietly left Yavin 4. Any hope that this experience might have taught them the virtue of cooperation was, of course, hopelessly naive. The wheels of politics continued to turn, and their hearts were still set on war. But their resumption of hostilities would be short-lived. A new, unknown enemy was about to emerge from wild space, led by a frightfully familiar face. And they were about to make both the Republic and the Sith Empire look like amateurs. While the galaxy was busy dealing with the ghost of Revan, the real ghost, Emperor Vitiate, made his move. In 3636 BBY, on the Imperial world of Zeost, he possessed the bodies of Jedi and Sith agents, announced his return, and then proceeded to absorb all life on the planet, just as he had done on Narthema over a millennium ago. Zeost was dead. Long live the Emperor. It turned out that the person known as Vitiate wasn't quite what he seemed. He had grown bored with his Sith Empire, seeing its constant infighting and dogmatic limitations as a failure. So he had found a new toy. For centuries, he had been building another civilization in the secrecy of wild space, the eternal empire of Zakul. There, he ruled openly, not as a shadowy Dark Lord, but as a benevolent, immortal Emperor Valkorion, a handsome, white-robed family man with a wife named Senya and 3 powerful Force-sensitive children, the twin boys, Thexan and Arkan, and a daughter, Vaylin. This new empire came out of nowhere, raiding both Republic and Sith worlds with its technologically superior eternal fleet, an automated armada that far exceeded anything the two superpowers could field. Darth Maul, now leading the Sith Empire, and the hero known as the Outlander, who had helped uncover the Revanite conspiracy, chased Valkorian's forces into wild space, only to be captured and brought to the throne room on Zakuul. There, Valkorian greeted them and promised them power if they would only kneel. Darth Maul refused and was killed instantly. But before Valkorian could deal with the Outlander, his own son, Arcan, jealous of his father's favor towards his twin brother, attacked and killed the Emperor himself. Arcan seized the throne and, to remove any witnesses, had the Outlander frozen in carbonite. With his father dead and the throne now his, Arcan waged a brutal and devastating war on the galaxy. Within a year, he had conquered both the Republic and the Sith Empire. Their combined militaries were no match for the Eternal Fleet. The two great powers were forced to surrender and pay heavy tribute to Zakuul, with massive star fortresses placed in orbit above their worlds to ensure their compliance. The rise of the Eternal Empire was the ultimate humiliation for both the Republic and the Sith. It proved that their centuries-long conflict was a petty squabble that had left them both too weak and fractured to face a real, organized threat. It also revealed the true nature of their ancient enemy, Vitiate. He wasn't just a Dark Lord obsessed with the JD. He was a being of cosmic power whose ambitions went far beyond the simple Sith dichotomy. He was a builder of civilizations, a manipulative father, and a being who saw entire empires as disposable toys. His death at his son's hand only added another layer of complexity to the mystery. For 5 years, the galaxy held its breath under the brutal rule of Emperor Arcan. The Jedi were scattered once more. The Sith Empire had a new empress, but she was a puppet. But under the surface, a resistance was forming, led by Lana Beniko and Theron Shan. They rescued the Outlander from their carbonite prison, hoping to find a leader who could unite the galaxy against Zakuul. Things were about to get messy, because as the Outlander awoke, they discovered they had a new, unwanted passenger in their head, the ghost of the supposedly dead Emperor Valkorian. With the ghost of Valkorian now a permanent, unwelcome resident in their skull, the Outlander became the commander of the fledgling resistance, which they built into a formidable force called the Eternal Alliance. Their mission: bring down Emperor Arcan and his empire. Their primary asset, the unsolicited, manipulative advice of the ghost of the man Arcan, had just murdered. This entire galactic conflict was, at its heart, a toxic family drama. Valkorian, the ghost dad, was helping the Outlander, but his endgame was to possess their body after they had conveniently disposed of his children for him. The children themselves were a mess. Arcan, the bitter son on the throne, had killed his own twin brother, Thaxon, in a fit of rage and blamed their father for it. His sister, Vaylin, was a sociopath of incredible power who had been shipped off to a weird cult to gain control, and had not, to put it mildly, returned sane. Their mother, Senya, had broken up with the evil god Emperor and left the family years ago. It was a recipe for galaxy-wide disaster. The Alliance began its work, recruiting allies from all corners of the galaxy, sabotaging key Zakuulan assets, and destroying the terrifying star fortresses that held worlds hostage. The Outlander, guided by the Force, eventually found an exiled Sith Shan and the ghost of Darth Maul, who had spent the last 5 years philosophizing together and had developed a new, more balanced outlook on the Force. They taught the Outlander this new perspective, enabling them to finally fight Arkan head-on. Eventually, the conflict escalated, and the Outlander was able to defeat Arkan in direct combat. But before he could be captured, he was rescued by his mother, Senya, who whisked her wounded son away. This left the throne of Zakuul to his insane sister, Valen, who was far less interested in the nuances of galactic rule and far more interested in burning everything to the ground. It took the Alliance several more months of fighting to finally bring her down. With Valen's fall, the fully automated Eternal Fleet, now without a master, went rogue and began bombarding key worlds across the galaxy indiscriminately. The Outlander brought a stop to this chaos by traveling to Zakuul and claiming the Eternal Throne for themselves, bringing the fleet under the control of the Alliance. In an instant, the Eternal Alliance became a fully fledged galactic superpower, a new third faction holding a fragile peace between the battered Republic and the humbled Sith Empire. The war against Zakuul was less a war of empires and more a violent, galaxy-wide intervention in a single family's domestic dispute. It completely shattered the old binary of Republic versus Sith, replacing it with a new, uncertain reality. The war also forced figures from both sides to question their old dogmas, blurring the lines between light and dark in the face of a common, overwhelming enemy. The Outlander sat on the Eternal Throne, commander of the galaxy's greatest fleet, a reluctant ruler holding the peace between the two battered superpowers. This state of affairs, of course, didn't last long. A new conflict on the ancient machine world of Aukath would see the Eternal Fleet crippled and the Alliance weakened, effectively merging it back into the Republic. With the third superpower out of the way, the Sith Empire, which had been quietly rebuilding under a new Empress, saw its chance. It was time for a third galactic war, and to lead the charge, they brought back a familiar face, a renegade Sith Lord with a score to settle Darth Malgus. With the Eternal Alliance effectively dissolved, the Sith Empire, under its ambitious new Empress Asina, was eager to resume hostilities. The Third Galactic War began with an assault on the recovering Jedi world of Ossus, led by a commander the Sith had brought back from the brink of death, the formidable Darth Malgus. But while this new war was beginning, a loose end from the old one had yet to be resolved. Emperor Vitiate's death at the hands of his son Arkan had not finished him off. His spirit had endured, tied to the world of the living through his original body, which he had kept preserved in stasis for just such an occasion. When the Outlander's allies, the Jedi Knight Kira Carson and the former Emperor's Wrath Lord Scourge, finally found and destroyed this original body, they unknowingly unleashed the Emperor's final contingency, a spiritual plague that infected and possessed them both, as well as Seytel Shan and her followers who came after them. This plague was Vitiate's final, desperate form. The Outlander was the only person left who could stop him. After awakening Scourge and Kira from their comatose state, they stormed the ship where the possessed Seytel and her followers were quarantined. Their plan was to enter Satol's mind and destroy the Emperor's spirit once and for all. Inside the surreal mental landscape, they were joined by the spectral form of Revan. Together, the four heroes confronted the three faces of the Emperor: the benevolent tyrant Valkorion, the shadowy Dark Lord Vitiate, and his original form, the pureblood Sith known as Tenebrae. The three forms of the Emperor battled the four heroes, and their combined power was too great to resist. But just as they were about to be overwhelmed, the spirits of the Emperor's countless other victims appeared in the mindscape. Mitra Surik, Darth Maul, and thousands of others whose lives he had consumed. They revealed the Emperor's one true weakness, his crippling, all-consuming fear of final death. They poured their combined strength into the Outlander, who was able to contain and then utterly destroy the last traces of the Emperor's spirit. After millennia of tyranny, he was finally, truly gone. Meanwhile, the Third Galactic War raged on. Darth Malgus, after the Ossus campaign, once again broke free of the Empire's control to pursue his own agenda. The Republic and the Sith fought a protracted and bloody battle over control of the aquatic world of Manaan. The war burned across the galaxy for years. The final death of the Emperor was an event of cosmic significance, ending the reign of the single most powerful and long-lived dark side entity the galaxy had ever known. It was a victory achieved not just by a few heroes, but by the collective will of all the souls he had victimized over thousands of years. It closed the book on the ancient, true Sith and their 1,000-year crusade. However, the galaxy was too busy fighting its newest war to fully appreciate the moment. The Emperor was finally truly dead. But the Sith Empire he created lived on, though it was a shadow of its former self. Over the course of the long, grinding galactic wars, a curious trend emerged. The Sith Empire slowly became more empire than Sith, and like all empires built on a self-destructive ideology, it was doomed not to a glorious final battle, but to a slow, pathetic decay. The death of the Emperor didn't end the war, but it changed the Empire. A strange thing began to happen. The Sith's leadership, figures like Darth Maul and Lana Beniko, began to prioritize their civilization over their own personal power. This was a fundamental violation of Sith ideology, which preached extreme individualism to the exclusion of all else. For millennia, the need for unity to run an empire had been irreconcilable with the Sith's self-destructive demand for constant infighting. For every prior Sith state, this contradiction had led to inevitable collapse. But for the true Sith Empire, the opposite occurred. In a desperate bid to keep their civilization stable, they gradually diluted their own ideology to the point where they found common ground with their enemies. It was the ultimate Sith failure. They became reasonable. This ideological decay led not to a bang, but to a whimper. Within a century, the Sith Empire fragmented and was eventually destroyed completely. The Sith pureblood species, which had survived for millennia, went completely extinct within years of the final fall. The last great Dark Lord of this era was Darth Desolus, a former pawn JD master who fought his own brutal war against the Republic. After he and his followers killed 2,000 Jedi, Desolus was finally brought down by the entire Jedi Council. His death marked the end of the old Sith Wars, and the line of Dark Lords stretching back to Ajunta Paul was finally broken. The Jedi, once again, believed the Sith to be completely extinct. And once again, they were wrong. A few scattered Sith cults survived on the galactic fringe, and a single Sith Lord, the disciple of a secret line of masters, started by a follower of the Sith Triumvirate, also endured. For 1,000 years, the galaxy knew a fragile peace. Then, in 2000 BBY, an Umbaran Jedi master named Phanius left the Order. Phanius was a controversial figure who held the solipsistic view that he was the only person he could be sure really existed. Driven by resentment for the Council's rejection of his enlightened beliefs, he sought out the remnants of the Sith. Guided by a stolen holocron, he fell to the dark side, united the scattered cults under his banner, and took the name Darth Ruin. Revealing himself to the galaxy, dozens of his former Jedi admirers flocked to his cause, beginning the Fourth Great Schism and a new conflict, the New Sith Wars. Ruin's new Sith Empire was a pale imitation of its predecessors, a vast, disorganized confederation of megalomaniacs. His personal philosophy was also his undoing, believing his followers were little more than disposable illusions meant to serve him. He threw their lives away in battle with reckless abandon. Unsurprisingly, his disciples weren't terribly happy with this arrangement. Just a few years into his reign, a group of Darth Ruin's own students murdered him. They then immediately turned on each other, fracturing the new empire into a jumbled mess of warring Sith kingdoms. The end of the true Sith Empire was a slow decay brought on by ideological compromise. The new Sith that followed were a chaotic regression, plagued by the same predictable infighting that had doomed the Sith for millennia. Darth Ruin was dead, murdered by his own students. His confederation of megalomaniacs now at war with itself as much as with the Jedi. The new Sith Wars had begun, not as a grand crusade, but as a messy, chaotic brawl. For the next 200 years, the Sith remained a fractured mess, constantly fighting over who would be the next Dark Lord. Then, an ancient spirit was brought out of chaos to lead them, a vengeful wraith who would unite them, however briefly, under a banner of pure terror. After 2 centuries of pathetic infighting, the new Sith finally united again in 1750 BBY. Their new leader wasn't a mortal, but a vengeful wraith, an ancient dark side spirit known as the Dark Underlord, who was brought out of chaos to lead their armies. He amassed a legion of fanatical Darksiders known as the Black Knights, and for a time, they terrorized the Zona, Miki hyperspace wrote from their base on Malrev IV. Fortunately for the galaxy, his reign was brief. A Jedi master named Murtagh led a counter-offensive and, in a rare moment of inter-factional competence, successfully recruited the Mandalorians to join the fight. The Mandalorians crushed the Underlord's armies, while Murtagh himself banished the Dark Spirit back to chaos. However, in a perfect encapsulation of this futile era, the pressures of the battle turned Murtagh himself to the dark side, and he defected to the Sith soon after his victory. Even with such victories, the galaxy was in a state of terminal decay. The Sith offensive stagnated due to their own incompetence, but the Republic was imploding. Devastating plagues swept across Republic space. Entire swaths of the galaxy lost holonet access and interstellar trade collapsed. Civilization itself was fragmenting. The Republic government was so broken that in 1400 BBY, the Senate gave the office of Supreme Chancellor to a Jedi Master, a position that would be exclusively held by Jedi for the next 400 years. They were the only thing left propping the whole rotten structure up. Out in the lawless regions the Republic had abandoned, Jedi watchmen became feudal Jedi Lords, raising private armies to defend their systems from pirates and Sith warlords, a necessary but radical departure from Jedi doctrine. The Sith, meanwhile, produced a parade of bizarre and ultimately failed Dark Lords. After 1417 BBY, Darth Revan rose to power. His grand solution to the infighting problem was the creation of Sith Battle Lords, warriors bound to their commanders through a gruesome blood ritual that made them mindlessly loyal. The idea showed promise, but Revan was inevitably slain by his own apprentice, and the Jedi figured out how to break the blood bonds, rendering the technique useless. Next up was a shapeshifter named Bilia Dizu, who launched the Sickness Wars around 1250 BBY. Her contribution to galactic misery was a technovirus that gruesomely transformed its victims into zombie-like monsters of twisted metal called metanicrons. She was eventually assassinated by her own allies, the Macrosa Order, who got annoyed when her techno-beast started encroaching on their territory. After the Sickness Wars, the new Sith, though leaderless again, were on the verge of finally conquering Coruscant. But in their moment of ultimate triumph, they did what they always do. They destroyed themselves in an all-out civil war over who would get to be the one to rule the Ashes. This final, spectacular act of self-sabotage left both the Sith and the Republic too weak to rule the galaxy, beginning a 100-year period of total anarchy known as the Republic Dark Age. This long, brutal era was not a grand clash of titans but a slow, grinding decay of galactic civilization. The Republic was a ghost propped up by a feudal Jedi order, and the Sith were a fractured, chaotic mess. It was a dark age where everyone was losing, and the only question was who would collapse last. For nearly a century, the galaxy festered in this stalemate, a collection of squabbling Sith kingdoms and isolated Jedi protectorates. The galaxy was leaderless. The new Sith had every opportunity to win, but the individualistic, hyper-competitive nature of the dark side held them back. It would take the vision of a new kind of Dark Lord to finally reunite them and launch the final, decisive chapter of the new Sith Wars. And he would come from within the ranks of the Jedi themselves. The stalemate of the Dark Age was finally broken by a charismatic Jedi Master named Skir Khan. He was chosen by the Jedi Council to lead the fight against the Sith warlords, a choice that would prove to be spectacularly ill-advised. Not long after he was dispatched, Khan fell to the dark side himself. He claimed the title of Dark Lord of the Sith and, with his immense charisma, converted most of the Jedi the Council had sent with him to his cause. In an audacious act of deception, Khan claimed to the Council that he was only making a bid for control of the Sith so he could contain their threat from within. The Jedi Council, desperate and unwilling to admit they had made such a catastrophic error, actually believed him at first. They even sent formal congratulations as Khan and his followers won campaign after campaign, destroying the worst of the Sith warlords and usurping control of their armies. By 1010 BBY, Khan had successfully recruited or destroyed all other Sith factions, uniting them under a new banner, the Brotherhood of Darkness. But this was a new kind of Sith order, built on a radical, heretical ideology. To stop the endless infighting that had plagued the Sith for a millennium, Khan declared that all Dark Lords would be equal within the Brotherhood. He preached that while strength was paramount, it was eroded by constant competition, and that a degree of unity was required for the Sith to finally triumph. He even forbade his followers from using the title Darth, which he blamed for much of the disunity. It was an attempt to put a friendly, corporate, "we're all a team" spin on an organization of backstabbing megalomaniacs. The Brotherhood was led by a council of 16 equal Dark Lords, with Khan as a first among equals, and had a structure that was, as one observer put it, a twisted perversion of the Jedi Order. To challenge this new, unified Sith threat, the Jedi found their own champion. Lord Hoth, a legendary Jedi Lord from the Outer Rim, rallied the other feudal Jedi and their private armies, forming the Army of Light. For 10 years, the two forces fought a grinding war of attrition across the galaxy. The Brotherhood had a decisive advantage at first, but Hoth's tactical genius allowed the Jedi to best them in several key battles, fighting them to a draw. Faced with eventual defeat by attrition, Khan switched tactics. He launched one final, massive assault on what was left of the Republic, using the obscure mid-rim planet of Ruzan as a base of operations. This move was a gambit to draw the Jedi into a final, decisive battle. It worked. Lord Hoth committed the entire Army of Light to taking Ruzan. By the year 1000 BBY, both the Brotherhood and the Army of Light had summoned all of their followers to the desolate world, preparing for a final confrontation that would decide the fate of the galaxy. Lord Khan's Brotherhood of Darkness was the ultimate Sith heresy. It was an attempt to force a collectivist ideology onto a philosophy built on radical individualism. While it succeeded in uniting the Sith long enough to pose the greatest threat the galaxy had seen in centuries, it was a philosophical house of cards, a delusion that he could make the Sith into something they were not. This fragile unity was about to be tested by the arrival of a true believer, a Sith who understood the old ways and saw Khan's Brotherhood not as a solution, but as a blasphemy. The fate of the galaxy now rested on the desolate world of Ruzon. The entire Brotherhood of Darkness and the whole Army of Light were gathered for one final, apocalyptic battle. Lord Khan, his mind fraying under the pressure, was preparing his forces. But as he surveyed his council of equal Dark Lords, he was unaware of a new arrival in his camp. A recent graduate from the Korriban Academy, a man who had studied the ancient texts and despised Khan's new way. A man who called himself Bane. Darth Bane, having studied the ancient teachings of Darth Revan, arrived on Ruzon and saw the Brotherhood of Darkness for what it was, a perversion of the Sith way. He despised Lord Khan's watered-down, egalitarian philosophy. Khan, sensing a threat to his authority, tried to have Bane assassinated by several of his equal Dark Lords. Bane, a true master of the dark side, survived every attempt. Instead of challenging Khan directly for leadership, Bane offered him a truce. He claimed he would help Khan win the war, offering to share two powerful, ancient force techniques he had learned from Revan's holocron. The first was a massive, unified telekinetic wave. In the 7th Battle of Ruzan, Khan agreed, and Bane led the assembled Sith Lords in a meditation circle, focusing their power. They unleashed a devastating wave of raw dark side energy that shattered the front lines of the Jedi's army of light. But as the Jedi retreated, Lord Khan's jealousy got the better of him. Worried that Bane's strategy would win him the loyalty of the Brotherhood, he broke the circle early and ordered the Sith to charge, turning a strategic victory into a chaotic rout. The Jedi received reinforcements and annihilated Khan's disorganized armies, forcing the few surviving Sith Lords to flee deep into the valleys of Ruzan. Lord Khan, unable to cope with the massive failure brought on by his own ego, began to go insane. Darth Bane exploited this weakness masterfully. He convinced the Mad Dark Lord to use the second technique from Revan's holocron, the Thought Bomb. Bane described it as a dark side ritual that would absorb the souls of all Force sensitives within its blast radius, imprisoning them for eternity within a shimmering obsidian sphere. Khan, in his madness, believed that he and his most loyal followers were strong enough to survive the blast if they worked together. He gathered all his remaining Sith Lords deep in a cave, preparing the ritual as a final trap for the Jedi. Lord Hoth and his Jedi learned of Khan's plan and descended into the caves to stop him. As they entered, Khan, with a clap of his hands, detonated the Thought Bomb. In a silent, terrible flash, he, Lord Hoth, and every single Sith Lord and Jedi Knight in a wide radius were annihilated, their souls consumed and trapped forever. The Brotherhood of Darkness was gone. The Army of Light was gone. The 1,000-year-long New Sith Wars were over. The only Sith Lord who survived, having orchestrated the entire catastrophe from a safe distance, was Darth Bane. Claiming the title of Dark Lord of the Sith, he established a new order governed by a new philosophy designed to prevent the self-destruction that had always plagued the Sith. The rule of two. There would be no more councils or brotherhoods. Only two there should be, no more, no less. One to embody the power, the other to crave it. On the corpse-strewn battlefield of Ruzan, he found a young, Force-sensitive girl named Zana and recruited her to be his first apprentice. Darth Bane, through brilliant and ruthless manipulation, tricked the Sith into destroying themselves, taking their ancient Jedi enemies with them. His rule of two was a radical solution, ensuring that the Sith would only grow stronger with each generation, as an apprentice could only rise by becoming powerful enough to kill their master alone. This new philosophy would guide the Sith for the next 1,000 years, turning them from a blunt instrument of war into a scalpel of subtle corruption. With the galaxy believing both the Jedi and Sith armies were destroyed on Ruzan, Darth Bane and his new apprentice, Zana, retreated into the shadows. For the next 1,000 years, the Sith would be a ghost story, a myth. But the line of the Dark Lords would continue in secret, one master and one apprentice at a time, passing down their knowledge, amassing wealth and power, and patiently, meticulously, laying the groundwork for their ultimate revenge. Darth Bane and his apprentice, Darth Zana, settled on the desolate world of Ambria, a planet teeming with dark side hisses and dragons. For 10 years, Bane raised the young girl as a Sith Lord, training her in the ways of the dark side and constantly reminding her of the rule of one day she would have to kill him to take his place. After a decade, they were discovered by the Jedi during a misadventure on Tython. In a stunning display of cunning that would define the new Sith way, Zana used her powerful Sith sorcery to orchestrate their escape. She drove a childhood friend of hers mad, set him up as a decoy, Darth Bane, and the Jedi, not knowing what the real Dark Lord looked like, fell for the ruse and killed him. Believing the new Sith threat was nipped in the bud, the Jedi returned to their temples, blind to the true danger that now festered in the shadows. With the galaxy convinced they were dead, Bane and Zana began the true work of the grand plan. They crafted civilian identities, posing as wealthy nobles, and used Bane's financial acumen to seize the vast fortune of a dead Sith Lord from the old Brotherhood. They became fantastically wealthy, using their influence to subtly manipulate galactic events. Their goal was to ensure the Republic didn't collapse, reasoning it was far easier to corrupt and seize control of one galaxy, spanning government, than hundreds of splinter states. The chain of betrayal, the engine of the rule of two, continued. As Bane's body began to deteriorate from long-term dark side corruption, he grew frustrated that Zana had not yet challenged him for the title of Dark Lord, fearing she would wait until he was weak and frail, a victory that would violate the spirit of his rule. He sought out the secret of essence transfer, a ritual that would allow him to move his spirit into a new body. He even selected a new apprentice, an Iktochi huntress named Darth Cognus, to replace Zana once he had taken her body. Zana, unwilling to be a mere vessel, finally challenged her master. On Ambria, the apprentice fought the master, and Zana won. She thwarted Bane's attempt at essence transfer, destroyed his spirit, and took Darth Cognus as her own apprentice, ensuring the survival of Bane's line. For 1,000 years, this cycle continued in absolute secrecy. The line was almost broken several times. Darth Cognus's own apprentice, Darth Millennial, was a heretic who rejected the rule of two and was cast out to form his own cult. Centuries later, a Dark Lord named Darth Gravid actually began to turn back to the light, destroying much of the Sith lore and artifacts their order had painstakingly collected before his own apprentice, Darth Geen, managed to kill him in a battle that left her severely injured. The entire 1,000-year plan nearly ended in a moment of sentimental weakness. Eventually, the line passed to Darth Tenebrous, a Bith who lived his public life as a famed starship designer. He, in turn, forsook tradition and used his scientific knowledge to orchestrate the birth of a child he calculated would be immensely powerful in the Force, a man he named Plagueis. The 1,000 years of the rule of two transformed the Sith from a galactic menace into a patient, insidious conspiracy. They were a virus, slowly infecting the Republic's political and economic systems from within. Each generation of master and apprentice added to their wealth, their network of spies, and their knowledge of the dark side. all while adhering to the brutal logic of Bane's doctrine. By the time Darth Plagueis killed his master, Tenebrous, in 67 BBY, the Sith Grand Plan was nearing its final stage. The Republic was drowning in corruption, the Jedi were becoming increasingly blind, and Sith-influenced mega corporations held immense power. For his own apprentice, Plagueis chose a young, ambitious, and utterly ruthless aristocrat from Naboo, a young man named Palpatine. Darth Plagueis and his new apprentice, Darth Sidious, operated as a perfect team. In his public life as the influential banking executive Hago Damask, Plagueis manipulated the galaxy's mega corporations. As the ambitious Senator Palpatine of Naboo, Sidious stoked corruption in the heart of the Republic. For decades, they laid the groundwork for the final stage of the Grand Plan, installing Sidious as Supreme Chancellor and wiping out the Jedi. But over the years, Plagueis became distracted. He grew obsessed with his own personal quest, achieving true eternal life through the scientific manipulation of the midi-chlorians. He saw the Force not as a mystical entity, but as a poorly understood form of energy that could be controlled. His research became an all-consuming passion, and while he was busy in his laboratory trying to unlock the secrets of life and death, his apprentice, Sidious, was doing the actual work of preparing the galaxy for civil war. To help him with the more hands-on aspects of his work, Sidious took on a Dathomirian Zabrak, whom he trained as a Sith assassin, naming him Darth Maul. Plagueis, lost in his own arrogance, approved of this. He saw Maul as a mere tool, not a true apprentice, and believed that he and Sidious were beyond the old rules. They would rule together forever. It was his final, fatal mistake. In 32 BBY, the final stage of the plan began. Sidious and Plagueis manipulated the Trade Federation into blockading and invading the peaceful world of Naboo, while Darth Maul was dispatched to oversee the invasion. Sidious, as Senator Palpatine, used the wave of sympathy generated by the attack on his homeworld to masterfully maneuver himself into the position of Supreme Chancellor. On the night of his election victory, with their 1,000-year plan finally a success, the two Sith celebrated. As Plagueis drank too much wine and fell into a deep sleep, Sidious loomed over his master, the apprentice who had learned everything he could. The man his master believed was his partner followed the ancient rule of two to its brutal, logical conclusion. He killed the sleeping Plagueis with a torrent of Force lightning, proclaiming himself the one true Dark Lord of the Sith. What followed was the final, brilliant checkmate. With the help of his new apprentices, first the fallen Jedi Master Count Dooku, who became Darth Tyrannus, and then the broken hero Anakin Skywalker, who became Darth Vader, Sidious orchestrated the galaxy-spanning clone wars. He played both sides, controlled the armies, and guided the conflict to its inevitable conclusion. He used the war to destroy the Jedi Order from within, and, with the thunderous applause of a grateful Senate, transformed the Galactic Republic into the First Galactic Empire. The Sith Grand Plan, conceived by Darth Bane 1,000 years earlier, was complete. The victory of Darth Sidious was the culmination of 1,000 years of patience and treachery, a masterpiece of political manipulation. he proved to be the perfect instrument of Bane's will, a being of pure ambition and bottomless evil who played the long game better than anyone before him. He didn't just defeat the Jedi, he made them the instruments of their own destruction and turned the Republic into his personal plaything. For the first time in millennia, a Dark Lord of the Sith sat on the throne of the galaxy. The Jedi were all but extinct. The Republic was a memory. The vision of Darth Bane was fulfilled, but the Sith ideology contains a fatal flaw, a seed of self-destruction that even the rule of two could not eliminate. Ultimate victory, it turns out, is the one thing the Sith cannot survive. And Sidious's new apprentice, a broken man in a black suit of armor, would prove to be the instrument of his masters and his orders' final spectacular failure